edit the text messages that I posted in the chat. But yes, it's week 90. Let's just add it. Week 97. How about that? So we're moving along. We've only got this one and three more to go, and it'll be week 100
Okay,
of this group.
so the broader picture is the Greeks apparently pursued such things as excellence, competence, uh, broader appreciation of knowledge, temperance, and these are all highly adverse to the modern soul. The modern soul wants an easy ride. The modern soul has gone thoroughly Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper.
Yes. Well, we're charging along. We're charging along here. So I'm this week my reading that I'm doing on my own is my second book that I'm reading by F.M. Cornford, Francis MacDonald Cornford, who, as I mentioned a few months ago, was part of the triumvirate of scholars, Hellenic scholars, along with Gilbert Murray and Jane. How am I forgetting her name? The
Harrison. Harrison. Jane Harrison.
Jane Harrison. Jane Harrison. So I'm working my way through Cornford's books, and I went back to his first one, which is very short. It's almost like an extended essay, but it's called Thucydides Mythhistoricus. And I at first thought it would be, just because I'm into the history of the Peloponnesian War, I thought it would be sort of a hobby-ish type reading rather than deep, gripping philosophical reading. But I was mistaken. I was mistaken, and I must share with you the glories of Thucydides Mythhistoricus as a recommendation to the group. Certainly, I've recommended many times, and I will continue doing until we've all read it. Recommending Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. That is also recommended by Kenneth Smith. It was a formative influence. But what Cornford is doing in his book Thucydides Mythhistoricus is augmenting Thucydides' book with what's missing. He's saying, what did Thucydides is often praised for, inventing history compared to Herodotus, who was sort of a gossip spreader. That he was, rigorous about trying to be objective about history, and that we learn a great deal from him, and we learn a great deal from the great struggle between Athens and Sparta. And Cornford says, well, that's all well and true, but Thucydides didn't get everything right, and Thucydides was not entirely he didn't entirely succeed at being objective. There is an element of art, and dare he say, mythos, to the construction of the narrative history in the history of the Peloponnesian War. And he says you can really see it when you ask yourself the most basic question about the Peloponnesian War and say, has Thucydides answered this question to our satisfaction? Which is, why did the war happen? Why did the war happen? Why did they fight? And he goes through and analyzes what does Thucydides say, and what did other Greeks say, and what do modern historians say, and arrives at the conclusion that none of them satisfactorily answers it. When you actually just, you don't have to dig deep, you just scratch even a little bit, and you realize the explanations are very shallow, and don't really come to grips with things. So Cornford's book is about why is that the most fundamental question of the war is not answered by Thucydides, when, after all, he says right at the outset that's why he wrote the history, is to answer that question. So why didn't he? And then, what was really going on in Athens and Sparta and the rest of Greece at that time that was perhaps missed by Thucydides, or maybe taken for granted by Thucydides in a way that a modern reader can't take for granted, and so we miss it. Maybe his audience saw it. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that he gets into. It's really interesting. And a lot of it has to do with the rise. He doesn't use these words, but essentially, Kenneth Smith would love this. I don't know if Kenneth has read this. When I talked to him about it about 4 months ago, he suggested he hadn't read a lot of Cornford, so maybe not. But he suggests that it's the rise of the Banausoi that does it. That Solon, remember Solon, the great constitution maker and reviser of Athens, he did a great innovation that led to a massive increase in trade and the importance of trade to Athens. He set up the Piraeus, which is, a neighborhood right against the coast of Athens. And it grew and grew and grew as a political influence. And it was mostly made up, because of the revisions that Solon had made to the government of Athens, it was made up of outsiders, people who were not native Athenians, who were attracted by the favorable conditions. Solon made it so that you could become a citizen of Athens. You could be a foreigner, but you could become a citizen of Athens if you came with your entire family and set up permanent residence, engaging in crafts, serious, mercantile, constructive crafts. And so as a result of that policy, this neighborhood of Athens swelled in importance and power until the amount of trade that passed through Athens through the Piraeus was greater than any other Greek polis, like by a long shot. It's just a staggering level of power. And that the people who lived there absolutely depended upon maintaining trade supremacy. And they were benefiting as well from the continuation of the funds being paid into the Delian League by all of the other Greek city-states. They would, whether it was on the dole or through wages or through some other method, they were all being funded in effect through this revenue stream. So if the revenue stream were going to be broken by Sparta and her allies because they were tired of paying for the Persian War, which had been over for ages, that threatened this incredibly powerful and important rising economic class of people who hadn't been raised in the Athenian way, didn't have the Athenian values, and their main values were the values of the market. Utility.
So we're talking about Wall Street.
We're talking about Wall Street, right? Solon basically invented Wall Street, and as a consequence of that, they rose in power and dragged all of Greece into a great war. This is there's a lot more to the book. I'm only in chapter 1, but it's clear that's where he's going, among other things. And because it grapples with issues of logos versus mythos, of the aristoi and the douloi versus the banausoi, and all of these sorts of things, it makes a very interesting supplement to the reading we're currently doing in Millennia and Microcosm. And you don't actually have to read Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War first. Cornford does, in that early 20th century style of academic writing, he does an excellent job of laying out his premises and what the pieces are, and so you can be brought up to speed even if you've skipped Thucydides to date. It's a lot shorter than the History of the Peloponnesian War, so I highly recommend it. I commend it to you for your attention. I think you would really enjoy it. It's available for free on the Internet Archive. I've provided the link there in the chat, so feel free to go download it and read it. Phil, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Let me see if I could come up. I can't even get my controls. Can you hear me? Oh, now I'm on. Okay. Straighten me out there. I mean, I thought, well, and that's actually connected to Wall Street. I thought what you describe is probably a backstory that fills in, but what really motivated Sparta to attack was the building of the wall that's connected, I guess, to Wall Street, because in some sense, the wall was connecting Piraeus to Athens. And Greek cities are supposed to be kind of open cities, isn't it, to a certain degree, at least to other Greeks? And when you build a wall, it means you preventing other people from coming in. So that was a signal for that we want to keep people out.
I think you'd enjoy this book. I'm only in chapter 1, as I mentioned, but already it's clear there's a lot he talks about that is not generally discussed in relation to the Peloponnesian War. And among the things are that although modern interpretations of Sparta are that they were a highly aggressive military power, Cornford says that's absolutely the opposite of the truth. They didn't have their military to expand, and there were numerous opportunities when they might have, and they didn't. And the reason for that is they were a very, very fragile polis. What made them fragile is that the wealthy had been taking up more and more and more of the land until a very tiny percentage of the population owned most of the Spartan city-state, whereas the vast majority of the population, the Helots, had they barely scraped by. They were living miserable lives. And so the reason for the military focus of the upper class was to beat the shit out of the lower class and keep them from revolting. And as Cornford says, man, they were on a knife's edge, and they were any little push, and Sparta, the aristocracy could be overthrown. So they deliberately avoided getting into conflicts. And there's evidently, Thucydides makes this part clear. There's numerous times when the Spartans say the last thing in the world we want is to get dragged into a war. So a wall being built on a street somewhere outside of Sparta was of no interest to the Spartan. I don't mean it was of no interest in the sense of that's not worth fighting a war over. They might have had feelings about it, but they weren't gonna destabilize their sort of teetering oligarchy by racing off to get involved in a big military adventure. And as Cornford points out, once the Spartans did win the Peloponnesian War, everything fell apart for them. That was the beginning of the end for Sparta, and that's why the next round of the Peloponnesian War was other city-states kicking out Sparta. Sparta just did not have the stability and structure to be able to sustain military adventures. It's fascinating. I didn't know any of this. It's really interesting stuff. But Cornford, he quotes Thucydides, he quotes Aristotle, he quotes the Spartans. And they basically tell you, no way do we want to get involved in a war.
Well, certainly Athens was a trading city because it has a very powerful navy, and therefore has a lot of sailors that sail around the Mediterranean to trade. So that was already a development of Wall Street, if you want to put it that way, the marketplace. So that certainly makes sense. But I guess he underscores how that really was an important part. And in addition, they kept, collecting taxes.
Yeah.
For the war with, Persia, which should have been gone a long time ago, because, it was just a good thing to have more money. As long as somebody else paying. I mean, so they were really not doing the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and he points out Pericles has a strong argument that says, why is it that we're willing to pay an enormous amount of money, send people out to kill other people, but we're not willing to pay an enormous amount of money to spend on people who don't kill people, but who make beautiful things and make Greece more wonderful? So that huge class of tradesmen and craftsmen in the Piraeus were being paid by the Delian League funds to build the Acropolis and to do those amazing sculptures and constructions and so forth. So they absolutely depended on that flow of revenue. And of course, where did all that marble and timber and so forth come from? It came from trade. As Cornford talks about how no other city-state in Greece had the variety of resources that Athens did, because they were all dependent on what they're actually next to. Whereas
it does seem like New York City or Shanghai, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
So they become the center of, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, I'm going to have to read Cornford on the origins of the Peloponnesian War. But I think it's true that Athens took a line of action that was very, I wouldn't say anti-Greek, but not typically Greek. I mean, there was sort of a Spartan peace for a while, couple of 100 years actually. Sparta kind of settled disputes for Greek cities, and of course they had an army that could do it. But traditional Greek warfare was something that took place in the summer. The people who were party to the dispute assembled their phalanxes. They ran at each other. One of them couldn't hold and went into retreat. The other erected their trophy at where the other phalanx turned, the trophy, the turning. And Athens took a thing. They built the wall. They built the wall, that it was a walled city. Sparta was not walled. Sparta didn't even have a downtown. There was no downtown Sparta, really, you know. The source of food for Athens was actually, oh, let's see, it's been in the news recently. No, I think Ukraine. Actually, I think it's Bulgaria, but it was the western coast of the Black Sea was where all the grain came. They traded oil in pots, you know, ceramics. That's why ceramics was so big in Athens, I think, is because it was used to ship oil and wine to
Amphora.
Amphora. Yes, I'll use that word. I like ceramic pots, though. I'm low class, but amphora will do.
Well, I'm not inviting you to a history meeting anymore.
Good, good. Then Athens did one other thing, that not just build the walls, they fortified the passes that separated the Attic Peninsula from the, what do they call it? Where Sparta was. I don't know if it was what they call that peninsula historically.
Laconia.
Laconia, whatever. They fortified the passes. And what does this mean? Well, we're not going to be getting together this summer to have good old Greek phalanx on phalanx resolution of disputes. Athens took steps to put themselves outside the traditional Greek way of resolving things man to man by bumping shields and spears in a summertime campaign, you know. And I would say, some people would say, oh, well, that, you know, I don't know. I would say that's pretty hostile, actually. I don't know it. Other people might say it's pretty, it was just defensive, but I don't know. It also has we're going to create an order that in which we're untouchable. We've figured out the rules, and now you people with land armies, I think that may have left only Corinth as any kind of challenge. I can't. I think Florence was the only other seafaring state, but my Greek history is weak. Especially, I didn't take any B3. I never have, Mr. Steve.
I've taken some B3, and it's amazing how fascinating everything is after you've. It's like,
are you sure that's B3? It's not, you know,
sort of, you know, everything.
Psilocybin mushrooms or
like a whiff of summer, and you know, the Iranian president crashing just seems like totally fascinating. You know, it's just gripping you.
Right.
B3.
You sure you're not, you know, got mold on your rye grain there or something?
Forgot.
Ergot, yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I've thought about, I have thought about a lot about how the Peloponnesian War started. And Athens took some, what I would say, not aggressive or defensive or whatever, but disruptive. They were disrupting the typical Greek order and the way in which resolution of disputes were resolved between the city-states.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff.
You know, so I'm going to have to read Mr. Cornford on this.
I think you'll enjoy it.
Was that also the beginning of, in a way, Navy is being, in some ways, absolutely necessary? Because in the Battle of Thermopylae, you know, we always play up the 300 Trojans blocking their pass, but in fact, the Athenians with the fleet was very important in sort of blocking the fleet from going down either. So,
Yes.
the
Yes.
Themistocles was very, very important to that war.
Yeah.
So it was the beginning that maybe at that point, all the nations begin to understand how powerful navies could be, at least in terms of expansion.
Well, I see tributes to the Battle of Thermopylae on stickers on the back of pickup trucks all over where they say Molon Labe
Mm.
or whatever. Come and take them. The Leonidas's response to Xerxes: "You want our weapons? Come and take them."
Uh-huh.
And now it's some weird political group, and they put bumper stickers and decals. I see them in traffic, and I'm just, why Greek phrases on pickup trucks? I don't know. Anyway,
The cherry picking of Greek history and literature in order to satisfy, modernist motivations. This is par for the course for us, isn't it? We're gonna read the past as having the material we need to buffer up our own arguments.
Yeah, especially all those pickup trucks are from classical history buffs. I'm sure.
Every last one. That's right.
Every last one.
They read and write Greek. They're literate, really. They've read Plato in the original Greek. So I think it's an interesting book. I think you'll enjoy it. And the thing that I knew I was going to bring it up when, in the very first couple of pages, he starts out by introducing the concept of a worldview and says, we are inclined to assume Thucydides, by being objective about history, was therefore modern about history, or some proto-modern about history. He says, but you can't explain the omissions and the design and structure of the story unless you understand that he was not a modern, and that he didn't have a science of history. Science hadn't been invented yet. That what he had was, he grew up reading the plays of Aeschylus, in which human affairs have a tragic form. And so when he set about to write the history of the Peloponnesian War, Cornford says he wasn't lying when he said he's trying to be objective. Thucydides says he's going to try to be objective and just say what really happened. He's not a supernaturalist. He's going to try to explain everything in natural historical terms. But it doesn't change the fact that Thucydides had a worldview that's alien to our worldview, and that allowed him to construct the story in a way that made sense from that worldview's perspective. Well, and I'm reading all this and going, this would be a great introduction to our entire lecture series. It's just about worldviews and the amazing power they have to change the way we interpret the world.
Well, even among the Greeks, say Aesop could have said, I'm going to be objective and write a history, and it would have been from an entirely different perspective. There's no, I think we can say without question that Thucydides is judgmental about the war. He has, but that's what Aristotle are uniquely capable of doing, is judging whether something has been, in our recent lingo here, self-provident.
Well,
when were they acting?
Isn't history still a storytelling thing? I mean,
no,
a world narrative. I mean, archaeology has entered into it, but it's still a minor point in relationship to weaving into the storytelling. So the moderns are not modern, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, but we imagine we are. My wife has a history degree, and she says one of the things they studied was the great inflection point, the great debate, if you will, between followers of Machiavelli's approach to history, which was moralistic, and you tell the story in order to illustrate your moral principles, versus Guicciardini's version of history, which is, forget about your moral principles. The important thing is to say what actually happened. And if you're not saying what actually happened, if you're putting your thumb on the scales in order to make the moral come out a certain way, then you're messing with history and you're doing a bad job of it. And these guys were arguing about it. And the modernist approach is the Guicciardini approach rather than the Machiavellian approach. At least so we claim. but I'm with you about what we actually do, right? But our motivation is to wrap ourselves in the flag of objectivity and to pretend that we're not storytellers. We're just it's just the facts, ma'am. I'm merely an oracle for godlike truths about history. I don't have any personal dog in this fight. It's like I'm not even here. And that thumb that I'm pressing so hard on the scales with, just pretend that's not there at all. That's really just the forces of history and truth pushing on the scales, not me. This is the modern approach, which is so different. I mean, when you read the history of the Peloponnesian War, the great thing is the way he opens it up, going, "Who am I to write a history like this? Why would somebody do what I'm trying to do?" And he lays it all out there and makes himself vulnerable before the audience. And moderns are like, "No, no, 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 no. You do not say I am but a man and I have prejudices. You say, no, no, I am an oracle of the truth. I speak for science." It's fascinating. So I'm with you, Phil, but there's a level of pretense to the modern approach. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
For the sake of Phil, the whole thing with the sea trade and sea warfare had really started to become a big thing with the Phoenicians. So you start to look at 1000 BC, we'd already seen the sea peoples a few centuries earlier making big inroads via the sea. But the Phoenicians rise and they produce something spectacular change. They start, bulk sea trade in the Mediterranean. It became a regular business. Now, that build up. And so in the 8th century, that's the 700s BC, the Greeks and the Phoenicians were competing for colonies all over the Mediterranean. It had become big business by then. So 200 or 300 years before the Peloponnesian Wars, sea trade had become big business already. And of course, if you've got big fat merchant ships sailing past little islands full of poor people, they'll come out in their boats and steal everything. So you have to start constructing specialised warships to protect the merchants. There's literally images on Greek pottery of a big fat merchant and a warship sailing along together. And this was power. This was ancient times. Shipping using the sea lanes was the way of the economic way of transporting goods. You couldn't do it over land unless the goods were very valuable in relation to weight. But the sea just made it absolutely possible to build the solid foundations of all these cultures and civilizations in that period as we know them. But yes, so very much the Phoenicians about 1000 BC started really set the ball rolling.
Well, you're certainly right that the Phoenicians are very good sailors, and they were the first actually that began trade very much. I think that's why they developed something that was, if not the alphabet, was a precursor to the alphabet.
Yeah, it was the alphabet.
The Greeks took up, you know what I mean? It's like, so therefore that interaction, because when you travel to so many areas, you have to pick up the language, you have to figure out some abstraction that is able to weave it together. That was the beginning of the abstract alphabet, because, the Egyptians, still have pictographs, even though it was based on sounds, but nonetheless with pictographs. It was, and all of that, the Minoans too, that they were pictographs. It was really the Phoenicians that made that connection to, well, I was going to say the abstraction, except I remember, the Babylonians and so forth, that they had a really, really abstract alphabet, not the alphabet, abstract signs. I mean, it's like, it's just hard to even figure out what in hell they're saying.
If the Chinese ever saw the alphabet, the emperor rejected it because you'll put all my scholars out of work.
Well, you know what? There's a Chinese artist. I met him. He learned how to write, the Roman alphabet, but put it in a Chinese character. It's just amazing. I just thought, like if China had conquered the world, we might be writing English in a Chinese configuration, But it's very interesting. He write all these letters, and of course, the calligraphy is not as well done because it hasn't had the tradition. But it's like, yeah, you could write the Roman letter, which is essentially, the Western alphabet, and translate
Korea
it
actually tried to introduce
yeah.
a Phoenician style alphabet because of the printing press. That using the printing press with Chinese characters didn't work out
Oh,
that well.
no,
Stephen, there is a Korean TV series, The Tree with Deep Roots, about the king that invented the current Korean alphabetic system. And it's just fascinating. All the really neat work was done by women too, just as an aside. But it's a good story about how you create how a scientific creation of an alphabet, not just a history, but he had principles. That the letters in Korean, if you know how to interpret them, tell you where the tongue and the teeth and the lips are to make the sound.
Yeah, that's better.
It's really it's like, wow, this is deep, but a lot different from like the Phoenicians.
Well, an interesting thing about the Phoenicians is that they might have kicked off that phase of Greek culture. Thebes, the city of Thebes, was supposedly started off as a Phoenician colony. You look at some of the early Greek philosophers, and they seem to be descended from Phoenician families. So the Greeks apparently, I think, got their basic arts from Phoenicia, and then we'll start our own brand.
Yeah.
You're McDonald's, we're going to be KFC.
That's right. So all of this is just a way to ramp our way back to the text. So speaking of the text, we mostly finished the first half of paragraph 11 of section G, character and class. We ended with the next to last sentence of the first half. I'm going to post that plus the last sentence of the first half here again separate so that we can kind of ramp back into where we were. So this is talking about this whole issue of kind of the Greek perception. What did the Greeks think that humanity was like? What did the Greeks think the challenges were like? And what are these issues of self-providence that are so lacking in Homo sapiens that the majority of people don't seem to have any? They're unaware, unlike the average, beast of burden or animal. The average human being doesn't seem to know where their own health lies. What would be the healthy thing to do is a mystery. And even the best of the Greeks, the Aristoi, struggle and often make mistakes in trying to figure out where does our health lie? What should we be doing? Solon, who is lauded in typical discussions of Athenian politics as a great peacemaker and constitutionalist, if Cornford is right, in his interpretation, Solon set up the destruction of Athens by accident in trying to solve the immediate crises of his day. He made a constitutional modification that allowed the Banausoi to rise to power and take over foreign policy. They basically co-opted the democracy in Athens and aimed it in the direction of war and maintaining the flow of money for their trade and to keep all their craftsmen employed. So this is the stuff that we're talking about in section G is how do the Greeks perceive the human weakness in figuring out what's a healthy direction to act in. What would be the self-provident thing? Where is our phronesis? Where is our sophrosune or sophronein? I spent 3 hours this morning going back through my translations of Heraclitus and looking at how often he uses terms like phronesin or sophronein or sophrosune. He circles those words round and round and round. And when you look at the translations, even Wheelwright, who's trying his best to do authentic Heraclitean translations, often just struggles and ends up saying intelligence or prudence, or he's not any more sure than the rest of us. And the reason is he's trying to put it into English and it can't be done. He's trying to pound a square peg into a round hole and it won't fit. Our language militates against our ability to talk or think clearly about what the Greeks thought were the very most important issues. And the reason modern English makes it that hard is that the moderns don't care about those things. We care about practicality. How do you achieve what you want? What is the easiest way to get what you want? How do you accumulate power? How do you accumulate money? What are machines and technologies you can use to get the things you want? And the whole question of, is it healthy to want those things, is absent from the modern perspective. We don't care what's healthy. We want to win. We want to succeed. We're pragmatists. So, when Kenneth Smith writes, the Greeks see the mass of human lives be calmed in complacency and obtuseness, witlessly losing the inward war against pathos, right? The passivity, the suffering of life, because they have neither strategy nor discipline to defeat the vicious state of their own character, in effect. He's talking about us, right? Any people that is anti-philosophical, anti-historical, and obsessed with pragmatism is obsessed with getting what they want. That is to say, with further enslaving themselves to whatever their desires happen to be, rather than asking themselves the questions about, are these the right desires to have? Am I pointing in the right direction? The Greeks believe is the question every human being should always be asking themselves in every decision and every move they make. Where is the right direction? Am I going the right way? Whereas we believe that's impractical. It's a waste of time. You're just wasting resources. Just go for what you want. Don't think. Just live each day like it's your last. These are the bumper sticker slogans of modernism, right? Just go for it, baby. Go get it. You can do it. Just want it enough. How many Disney films have a young hero who's full of desire and he dreams of something bigger, and the story of the film is, yes, you can become bigger than you are. You might have to modify things a little bit along the way, but yay, you could be a winner. We're all about winning, and this is that state of vice that not Frodo. This is the state of vice that the Greeks are concerned about. People who think the way we do, say the Greeks, will be the death of us all. They're going to lead us into war and destruction. They can't stop themselves from thinking in short-sighted ways of just going after their appetites and their ideologies without questioning them adequately. So, the wrap-up of the first half of paragraph 11, he says, folly and the comedy of self-delusion encompass malformed judgments in every direction. These turn. And by these, he means the mass of human lives that are becalmed in complacency. Everywhere people like us turn, we see folly and the comedy of self-delusion. If you watch, TV comedies, and what is so funny about them? What is the basis of them? Why do we spend all our time looking at that stuff? What he's saying is here, the reason that we see that in every direction we turn is because we ourselves generate this noxious miasma. The folly and self-comedy that we point at everybody else around us. We say, we're the only sane ones. Everybody else is crazy. It's like, if everywhere you go, you meet assholes, the problem might not be them. It's the one thing all of these encounters have in common is you. Everywhere you go, there's an asshole. It's like, what do you know? Of course there is. One explanation could be there's thousands upon thousands of assholes everywhere we go. And the other is, well, there only needs to be one. And I would have the same experience. Everywhere I go, everything is horrible. So notice you use the word miasma. You mentioned Thebes earlier in association with Phoenicia. Miasma is the term that's used to describe the state of Thebes when Oedipus is king and everything is going badly for Thebes. They say the city is under a miasma. That is the all of this stuff goes into it goes into the roots of Greek culture that go back 1,000 years earlier. This is stuff you can see in Cornford's book, From Religion to Philosophy, where he talks about these ideas of your life works out well if you know what your proper actions in life should be, and you take those actions. Ethos, which to the later Greeks means character, to the earlier Greeks, it means the way of life of a tribe, right? And specifically of a clan within a tribe. So if you're the fisherman, you lead a fisherman's life. There's a cycle to your day. You have to mend your nets, right? You have to make sure your boats are in good order. You have to, make sure you've got the bait. You've got to dry the fish. There's things that you do in your life according to the turn of the seasons. And if you do all those things, if you follow that ethos of a fisherman, then your life works out. You find the road to health and vitality like an animal can by following your ethos. But if you do not pay attention to the boundaries that separate you from, a carpenter or a shepherd or somebody else, and you start mixing and matching and trespassing upon things that are not yours, that you don't know how to do, you're going to screw those things up because you never learned how to do any of that stuff. You're gonna blunder. Doesn't matter how intelligent you are. The question is, are you aligned with your ethos? And if you're not aligned with your ethos, it provokes phthonos. There is this instant, immediate, horrific pushback from the fates themselves because you have colored outside the lines, you've touched the third rail, and you get shocked. The Greeks, this was very central to the Greek worldview. This goes all the way back to when they were migrating, before they set up any city-states at all. They were just entering into Europe from the East. They had these ideas about, people's proper place in life. And if a people consistently stray from their ethos, then the constant recurring phonos pushback generates a miasma over their lives, where they feel unlucky. It seems like nothing ever goes right. They might identify a few ways in which they've gone wrong, but they've at this point doing so many things wrong that everywhere they turn, things are going badly. And so they describe it like there's a bad air over the whole of Thebes at the time that Oedipus Tyrannus begins. So this is what he's talking about here. A modern looks around and we say, well, it looks like lions are endangered. Hey, what do you know? It looks like grizzly bears are endangered. Oh crap, salmon are endangered. Hey, our soil is thinning. There's pollution in the air, the waters. Everywhere we turn, we see all these problems, and we keep, as moderns, trying to pragmatically treat each one as a one-off occurrence of some kind. And if we just make some slight adjustment to some policy or some tax, or there's some little touch to the machine, we think the problem will go away. And the idea that it's not going to go away because our entire way of life freely generates these problems everywhere that we act is inconceivable to us. We can't imagine that we are out of sync with our ethos. Yes. We can't imagine that we're out of sync with the ethos. We can't imagine that we're out of sync with phronesis and sophrosune. We don't even believe phronesis and sophrosune are things. We don't have words for those things. Yeah, Atheling. Yeah, that's right. So as a result, we ourselves generate this noxious miasma in our lives all around us through our worldview. And until we correct the fundamental issue and become willing to orient not towards whatever's faddish or in or gets us paid this week, but towards what's healthy for us as a species, we're going to relentlessly keep running into folly and comedy of self-delusion all around us and keep thinking that it's everywhere but in us. Why does the US have to fight so many wars? Why do we have so many enemies? Why are there so many terrorists? Well, our answer is because there's bad people in the world and you just have to hit them and make them go away. But that is what any idiot says about the life of miasma they're generating for themselves. I can't be responsible for these problems. I didn't spend 60 years generating coup d'etats in Central America and destabilizing governments until nobody can live there and they all have to leave and migrate. No, that's not us. It's a coincidence and nothing to do with us, right? We don't want to believe that our actions have consequences that we didn't intend, that are out of our power. And we think that way because we have no orientation towards what's healthy. All right, so Phil, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
I wonder whether that has something to do with at least our concept of language, maybe language in general, because so much of language is embedded in the subject-object relationship. In other words, we are beings of action. We move things, we do things, like push them out of the way, bring them closer, whatever. There must be a way that is antithetical to that, which is the relation of figure ground. In other words, instead of being that way, you see the ground is already there, you enter into it, which is actually the way it is, right? You enter into it and you have a relationship with all the things that are around that are, in a sense, maybe making room for you, but it's not being pushed away. I wonder whether we have the ability, because we have intelligence and smarts, and we have constructed this sort of like man of action. You got to go out there and do things, to survive. I wonder whether that didn't structure our way of creating language that seems to be, the subject, the verb, the object relationship, that we can't get out of that perspective because it almost seems like, you have to be the ground in a way to accept yourself into it. That seems very, very difficult. I mean, maybe because we've been so brainwashed by the structure of language that we do move through it in this man of action. If we don't do it, it almost seems like we just end up sitting back and watching it. Which is also very strange. So, yeah, I mean, I do understand that, and in a way that almost seems to illustrate, the relationship of Oedipus when he went to Thebes, on his way to Thebes, and when he was in Thebes, versus Oedipus at Colonus, because he was almost, in some ways, almost a non-figure, being absorbed by the ground in the structure itself. So, yeah, I don't know. To tell you the truth, I mean, I could think about that, but I wouldn't know how to behave in that way. I mean, it's just very, very hard, because there seems to be something within me that motivates me to do things, to act, to do something. Even if I go downstairs to get some food or whatever, like, it just doesn't happen. I have to make it happen at some point. So, yeah, how do you change that? I don't know. Like, even if you structure a language that is that way, you still have to do it. I mean, you just have to, I guess, be more harmonious with the ground, but you're still doing it. Like, I guess, be very careful you don't step on the twigs, that kind of thing, which is also strange. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. It just seems like a very, very deep problem that we have.
Yeah, it's a deep problem. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I was just bringing up the Lord of the Flies syndrome, which there's a great deal of pushback against these days, because the modern view is people are inherently good. It's only some weight upon them that causes them to be bad. But, you have the examples of, where people have been shipwrecked on islands, and then a most despotic situation arises. When suddenly certain people find that they no longer feel constrained by the what civilization had presented them with limits before, and they figure that they're the power on Earth. I think there's an island off South America which lost contact in the early 20th century, and they ended up with just one guy on the island and a whole load of women, and he figured, his role was to rape the women over time. And actually, one of the women murdered him. They got picked up by a US ship. But no, modern mind doesn't. We're pushing back. We, the humanists, say people are inherently good, and whatever way you throw the cat called human, they're always going to end up morally upright.
Robinson Crusoe, right? Swiss Family Robinson. Wherever you drop somebody, they will make everything better and more moral and enlightened.
Well, of course, you end up on the small islands. A true Englishman will start rebuilding Britain.
That's right. Reinvent civilization.
It's the complete opposite to what actually happened with Selkirk. He went down the gurgle. He was a educated man. He was a navigator and whatever. And by the time they found him a few years later, he was next to crazy. And then he went back to normal after a while. So our sense of being is somewhat dependent on society. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So let's look at the second half of paragraph 11. This is where the meat really starts to come together. The Greeks understood how much of this profound malady of disformed character is incurable, is fated. Okay, so we've got character and fate in the same sentence. So Kenneth Smith is quoting Heraclitus, right? I mean, character is fate. Ethos anthropoi daimon. This is the trick to reading Kenneth Smith is learning what the keywords are, and when you find the keywords, if you've read the supporting materials, you know what he's thinking when he writes this. You know what his intent is. He's talking about that problem, and he's saying fated, but of course Kenneth Smith understands the whole complex around the relationship between any of us and our character, that it's more complex than that. On the one hand, it's fated. Yes, we're going to act out our character. But on the other hand, if we cultivate our character, we can change our fate. But we have to have the resources, the internal characterological resources that would permit us to understand that our relationship to our own character can be that of not just a pathetic consequence of it, but also an actor upon it. If we haven't been taught that feedback loop, we haven't learned how to do this, how to discipline ourselves to do the work. If we haven't learned the need for introspection and modification of our habits, then character is fate in a strict, linear, kind of fatalistic way. But if we can learn to modify ourselves, if we're lucky enough to have been raised the right way and have the right resources, then it's a more complicated relationship. Our character is still our fate, but our character is malleable, so our fate is malleable. But still, there are limits to how much any one of us is going to understand or be able to modify our own character, and therefore there are limits to how much we can modify our own fate. So it's become very complex, right? So, all right. Human beings will live their lives according to their own preferred concerns. That's what most of us consider freedom, right? I get to do what I want. I don't have to do things I don't want. I get to be who I want. I get to say what I want. In other words, I can be a symptom of my character in which I'm utterly slavishly dependent upon inward resources I don't understand, and they make me do what I say, but I will call that free. That's most people's definition of freedom without understanding that that's what they're saying. And most cannot detach themselves from those preoccupations to criticize and reform them. So this is that issue. We're like, as long as nobody else is holding the whip, we think we're free, even if our own character is holding an invisible whip over us. and ensuring that we, drive ourselves into self-destruction. We still think that's free because at least we chose it, right? Which is the meaning of Nietzsche's man would rather will the void than be void of will. We would rather throw ourselves off a cliff and say, I did this. I was free, and I expressed my freedom through my throwing myself off this cliff, and yay, rather than acknowledge that, that maybe we should just shut up and sit down for a while. It would be the best thing for us. Wait, there's this thing that happens in discussion. Suicide is an epidemic in the United States. I don't know how it is in Australia or other countries, but in the U.S., enormous numbers of men kill themselves, far more than are murdered. It's just like the ratio is just it's hugely up. I can't remember, it's 40-1 or something. Just vast numbers of people here kill themselves, and in the discussion in politics, a lot of times the political argument says, well, don't in any way try to stop them, because if a man is determined to kill himself, you can't stop him from doing it. He'll find a way, so you should just step out of it and not doing anything. But actual psychological studies of suicide in the United States suggest precisely the opposite is true. That most people do not absolutely determine to kill themselves no matter what. Most people who kill themselves just have a bad night. Maybe they had a bad week and they have a moment of despair. And if in that moment of despair, there's nothing that they can do about it, then it passes. And the next day they get up and go about their lives. But if in that moment of despair, they have the resources to kill themselves, then that moment becomes the definition of their life. And that's it. They don't get anything else. And that's nowhere to be found in the political discussions. We don't want to acknowledge that there is this issue. And part of it is because moderns don't like to acknowledge the extent to which our own will is corrupt and can't be trusted. Some days our will is overly optimistic. Some days our will is overly pessimistic. It rises, it falls, it shifts with the tide. This is the thing, the Greeks understand this. They talk about this relentlessly, about how difficult it is to be human. We're creatures of a day. I get up tomorrow and I'm in a different mood. I'm like a different person than I was today. And that's a problem. It's one of the things that separates us from, genuine rationality or whatever we imagine the gods might have. It's, when Heraclitus says there is no real human understanding, only the divine has genuine understanding. It's part of what he's talking about. Is our grasp of what's going on around us is constantly shifting and flowing out from under us. But modernity is based on the prospect that human will is wise and prudent, that we always know what our self-interest is, and we always act in the interests of our self-interest. All of our theories that we teach about how politics works, how economics works, it's all based on the idea that people are acting for their own good. But the Greeks don't think that's possible. They think most people have no idea what their own good is. And, if you don't do something to help people who are in that condition, they're going to harm themselves while they're attempting to get what they want, because they're attempting to get what they want. The man who despairs for a moment and puts a bullet in his head is a man who would have lived a long, happy life if in that one moment of despair, he hadn't been able to act on what was actually atypical of his will and was maybe never going to come back again. So this is that issue. If we can't question our desires, if we can't question our will, if we can't question our ideology and our experiences, then effectively we're not yet people, in the sense of we're not fully actualized. We don't have meaningful freedom, and we aren't able to meaningfully individuate. We're just sort of the consequences of our upbringing and our genetics and so forth, which is not. This is what Socrates means when he says the unexamined life is not worth living for a man. He means that's not a fully human existence. That's like a stage of development that someone has got stuck on, and somebody should have tried to help them to get further than that, because the state that they're in is not only painful for them, even though they blame everybody but themselves for that pain, it's painful for everybody else to be in that condition of being either addicted to your experiences or addicted to your ideologies. Phil, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Sharon was before me. I don't know if she wants to talk.
I know, she put her hand back down.
Okay. My question is that I presume that back in the Greek days, they
I should
didn't
put her
have
hand back up.
the concept of the unconscious. I mean, there's fate, but there's not the unconscious. And I wonder to what degree the philosopher of the Aristoi can penetrate the depth of the unconscious, even if they knew about it. You can only go so far in terms of contemplating. There's something a deeper that's almost groundless. So yeah, you could control it to a certain degree, but at some point, there's if you believe in Freud, I don't know if I do, but you believe in the driver, even if you don't believe in Freud, you believe in Jung, uh, there's a deeper story. So how could you be an Aristoi in a complete sense through just contemplation, but because there's a factor beyond which you can't contemplate beyond because it you can only access it through the dream, which is kind of weird. I mean, they must have dreams before, but like I guess maybe they think of that as the fates or something. But to what degree is the Aristoi able to be a complete person? Because there's a part that is kind of missing, which is our subconscious, which is really connected in some way to some deeper self, but not necessarily even connected to the world. So could you say something about that? What he says about that, and how the Greek talks about that? Because there must be something written about the Greeks having dreams, and how do they deal with that?
So I'll call on Sharon in just a sec.
Okay.
But I'm gonna say I'm gonna be able to give a much better answer to your question after I read a book that's on my list to read next after the current one I'm working on. And that's by John I. Baer. It's called Greek Theories of Elementary Cognition from Alcmaeon to Aristotle. And one of the books I was reading pointed me in the direction of this thing. And it's available for free on the Internet Archive. Let me see if I can find the link. Oh, yeah, there it is. Come on. Wake. There it is. So here's the link if anybody wants to beat me to the punch or if anybody's already read it. And this is basically going through all the available Greek literature to try to figure out how the Greeks thought the mind worked. And I think that's going to make a really excellent supplement to the Kenneth Smith stuff I've picked up, as far as really trying to ground my understanding of how the Greeks saw themselves. I'm kind of because I'm running these seminars. I'm not only trying to walk you guys through Kenneth Smith stuff. I'm also trying to walk myself through additional supporting materials that'll give me more background than I picked up from Kenneth Smith. So I read the book about Greek ideas about slavery to try to get a better handle on doulos, and this is the one I'm trying to do to get a better handle on aesthesis, gnosis, noesis, and all of these the nature of the psyche and so forth. And I'm sure this will talk about dreams. I have no doubt because that was a major. The Greeks talked a lot about it. so let's put a pin in that one, and I'll come back to it when I'm somewhat less ignorant than I am today. Right now, everything I've got is second and third hand, and I'd rather get some stuff firsthand.
Okay. Okay, for the non-answer answer.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm not worthy to answer it yet. Give me a few months. I would call on Zelig, but Sharon had her hand up before Phil, and then she put it down, and then she raised. So I'm going to call on Sharon.
So I was going to agree with Phil because I do think there's something probably missing in the Aristoi in the Greeks of old when it comes to suicide. Because in my suicide, but cognition and the way the mind works, because in my experience, people who have endogenous depression are the ones that commit suicide. I mean, this politician here, Jamie Raskin, he had a 22-year-old son who just committed suicide. He had everything to live for, but he had fought depression his whole life. And I've had colleagues who've done that too. And as an anesthesiologist, our success rate of suicide is very good. We do it every day, So, I agree with Phil that there seemed to be missing that part of it. when it comes to how the mind works, and the people that are incapacitated, have mental incapacities. What did they do with them? How did they address them? So I agree with Phil. I mean, we talk about Jung and Freud. Were they just running around the edges of this? Today, we are a lot more sophisticated and we can handle those people, and they still commit suicide, But it's just a question. It's the same question that Phil's asking. It's the same one I have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, it's interesting because like I have type 2 bipolar. There's about, I don't know how many, 7, 8, 12 types of bipolar. I'm sure by the time they're done, everybody will be characterized as having some type of bipolar. And the reason I say that is type 2 bipolar is so different from type 1 bipolar. It's astonishing. They call them both bipolar. In type 1 bipolar, you swing in and out of mania and then back down into depression and then back up into mania and back out into depression. I don't do that. I swing in and out of depression. And so people who think that my depressed state is normal think that my normal state is manic, but it's actually, oh my God, life doesn't suck today. This is great, but I'm not like running off adding zeros to my paychecks and crap like that. I'm just like, yay, I'm having a nice day. I think I'll sing. So I'm familiar with depression. I'm very familiar with depression. I've had it all my life, but mine doesn't come with any suicidal ideation. Never, ever in my life have I been tempted to commit suicide or, long to commit suicide or any of those things. And I, used to rationalize it in my 20s and go, I must just have a superior character. 20s are like teens. You're sort of still an adolescent in a lot of ways. So I had a certain amount of hubris. But eventually I figured out it's that I'm lucky. I'm lucky, right? It's that my character isn't wired that way. There are people who are wired to have suicidal ideation, and they're very unlucky because when they swing into depression, it's a much greater hazard for them than when I swing into depression. I swing into depression, and I go listen to classical music and read a book. This is not a threat to life and limb the way it is for somebody who has the structure of being tempted by suicidal ideation.
That's probably the genetic spectrum of the disorder.
Exactly. I must have just inherited it this way. And so, because of the way that bronchitis works in my life, because of the way alcoholism works in my life, because of the way depression works, because of the way suicidal ideation doesn't happen in my life, I've lucked out to be really receptive to this ancient worldview. The idea that character is fate and that we have this very complicated relationship with our ethos, it seems obvious to me because the whole structure of my life is based on these things that are outside my control and swing in and out of focus. And I've learned to accept them. So if the Greeks put all that to clear language and define a clear model, my reaction isn't going to be, hey, you can't tell me I'm not free. My reaction is to go, well, that explains a lot. That makes sense out of my life. I'm prepared to accept this. So anyway, Zelig, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
How's it going? Phil just basically took the words out of my mouth. I was thinking of Freud as well. How the ancient Greeks had all these concepts of the good, the beautiful, and truth, and how we ought to form ourselves according to the likings of them. Although not to the perfection of it, but at least strive as a direction. But in modernity, we kind of lost those conceptions that there's such standards of the good, the truth, and the beautiful out there besides ourselves. And he invented what you would call psychoanalysis to try to regain a form of civilization for the common individual that no longer had these ideal leaders that in the 1900s we were starting as a society, as an advanced society, we were starting to be skeptical of anyone that had any claim to charismata, to have some kind of receive wisdom from on high or some kind of mystery and knowledge, right? And we started becoming skeptical, or the epistemology of skepticism. And Freud understood that. Freud understood have any external standards to your life, then individuals are going to concern themselves with their primary unconscious, irrational desires, and it's going to destroy society. which led him to write Civilization and Its Discontents, where he said, if you want to have a civilization, everyone, you need to be discontent to a certain degree. You can't be happy all the time, because civilization building is not a happy thing, because you got to deny your subconscious irrational desires, right? And reading, recently I read a book called The Palliative Society. It's a Korean author, I forgot the name, but in the book of The Palliative Society, it says how today modern man just lives for well-being, for happiness, and no longer has an input for pain in their life. Pain is supposed to be diminished at all costs. And that's what Freud tried to do with with psychoanalysis. Try to make us cope with pain through it, and I think Freud failed, right? And so we're living in the shadow of psychoanalysis failed. How do we integrate pain into our lives as a part of our lives, and we should accept it? And we're currently losing that battle where pain is being diminished in every possible way. So the modern man no longer has pain as part of the character building, whereas the ancients in Greece, they did, you know?
Yeah, I'm hearing Aeschylus in what you say. Drop by drop, wisdom is distilled from pain. That idea that and this was core to the ancient worldview, that our characters point us in a direction and make us willing to notice and accept and orient towards certain things, and equivalently make us unwilling to orient towards something that's against our character. It's painful to us. By character, it's painful to us to have to confront the things that our character wants us to turn away from. We feel this great internal struggle when we are forced by circumstances to look directly at something we didn't ever want to acknowledge. The power of denial, right? It's not just a power over us; it's an existential pain. And so this is what Aeschylus is talking about when he says, when our circumstances conspire to prevent us from hiding or turning away from the painful truths, then we finally have the opportunity to learn some greater wisdom, because the wisdom lies in the parts of our lives we don't look at, we don't want to acknowledge, we don't want to think about. And as long as we remain turned away from those areas, this is Jung talks about this a lot. As long as we remain turned away from those parts of ourselves in our lives, we're unable to learn the lessons that only lie in those places. And so Aeschylus is talking in part about that. There is a wisdom to be gained, but it often will only come at the price of pain, because it's only through suffering, through pathos, that we are compelled by the circumstances of our life to face something that we never wanted to face, and then we're able to possibly learn the lesson. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I wanted to respond a bit to Phil. I don't think it's the case that for the Aristoi, contemplation is the way of living the examined life. I mean, they get asked questions. There are other people in the world. They don't just turn to themselves. They can, I mean, Socrates doesn't say the unexamining life is not worth living. He says the unexamined. So I assume that, and he doesn't leave it up to these people that he talks to, he doesn't say, go, contemplate this for a bit. No, he asks them sharp, pointed questions. And I would think that philosophers or Aristoi ask each other sharp, challenging questions as that help one come to that self-understanding. It's not contemplation in its entirety. That's not the only means they have to better understanding. But it's also not clear that there's perfect self-understanding, that parts of the self aren't just unknowable to us and to others, and then there are people that, you're a jerk, they help you get things straight. You know, the way you act really sucks. You know, they provide enlightenment. Okay.
Thank you, Donald. Yeah, I mean, I think about the old Okinawan senseis, you know, who have you walking through the kata and they tell you to do the next move, and you do the move and you hold the position, and they walk around the room going, "No, your arm is way off here. It needs to be over here. It needs to be up a little," or that would never stop this attack. You need to make sure that you circle around. Don't just put your arm out there. You gotta catch the incoming thing. And they're telling you you're wrong, right? But they're telling you you're wrong in a loving, patient, supportive way. And that relationship to criticism, where we need to surround ourselves with, what is that saying? If you're always the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong rooms. You need to surround yourself with people who are smarter, who are better than you at things, because otherwise, who's going to be correcting you? Where are you going to get your constructive criticism from that's going to challenge you? And of course, most of us don't, in the modern world, most people don't want to be challenged. They want to be the winner. The winner is the person that you can't criticize because they won. Only the losers get criticized, right? We have all this weird psychodynamic stuff that we took with us out of school, as a result of, the way we were made to feel inferior for not knowing the right answers to things. And it's just really unhealthy. You can see the way that what you're talking about, Donald, is that, you're supposed to be in a relationship with Aristoi, who are around you and are helping to, correct your form in life. And they don't do it because they want to make you feel bad. And they don't do it because they want to prove that they're better than you are. They want to do it because your arm's in the wrong damn place. You're never going to block that punch if you stick your arm out like that. And they know that's what you want. You're missing the mark, and they're going to help you learn where the mark is. And, but we're so twitchy about being criticized. We associate criticism with attack. Why would anybody say we were wrong about anything? We're perfect. The only reason they'd say we're wrong about anything is if they want to hurt us. That's the only possible motivation. Go ahead, Donald. I see you've got something.
No, I think you're right that examined life and self-knowledge presume deeply that there are other people that help you with this,
Yeah.
And I don't know that philosophy, well, maybe it makes a difference. If there's only one person in the world and he sits in his cave and contemplates, maybe it makes him a better person in some way, but he doesn't. But how he treats others, how he acts, and how he behaves,
right,
the consequences of that are greatly diminished. It's only when they're important that philosophy itself is important. This developing the self-provident character.
Yeah, I think you're really pointing out something essential here. I mean, what do you call a sensei who decides to isolate himself and sit in a room by himself and contemplate his martial arts? Well, he's not a sensei. He doesn't have any students. It's the relationship with other people where you're helping them that makes you a sensei. And I think the same is true of an Aristos. In Aristos, this is where the 1,000 years of medievalism has got into our heads. We have this idea that to be the highest and wisest is to be isolated by yourself in a little monk in the desert in a cave, who just contemplates God. And that's the furthest thing from the world when it comes to what the world needs. Then the world needs help with anthropoculture, with raising up the next generation of people to do better. And they're not going to get that help if the people who know how to do better all go hide in caves and don't talk to anybody and contemplate their navels. That's it is the praxis of being an Aristos that makes someone an Aristos, not any kind of badge or status or diploma. If they're not practicing, then they're not the thing. And, as Donald has said repeatedly over the last couple of years, one of the ways that there aren't any Aristoi in the world is that there aren't any Aristoi in the world. Because there are no examples to follow around and see what they do, there's no way for any proto-Aristos to become an Aristos. You only learn by example, by working together. You can't lift yourself up by your own bootstraps and become an Aristos. That's impossible. There's no such thing. So that becomes a self-perpetuating state in modernity, that there can't be any new Aristoi because anybody who might have developed into an Aristos is going to fail to develop that far. They have no midwives, they have no teachers, they have nobody to help them to unfold and develop in those directions. It's like I've done traditional martial arts by myself, and I've done traditional martial arts with a sensei. And let me tell you, even if you spend 7 years with a great sensei, right, and you learn all kinds of stuff, if you then spend the next 30 years by yourself without a sensei practicing, at the end of those 30 years, you're going to be a much worse karate practitioner than you were after the first 7 because you've drifted. There's nobody looking at you from the outside. You can't, there's all kinds of things about yourself you can't perceive. And if you don't have that dialogue relationship with somebody else who can be looking at you and going, whoa, I remember 30 years ago, you used to do this block right, but now it's sort of drifted off to the side. And I can see why you don't see it, but you've got to fix that. If you don't have that, you drift out of true. To Aristoi are not, it's not a state, it's a cultural relationship in an ongoing dynamic one. And we don't have it. We purge them from our society. I used to say they're all either, what do I say? They're all either dead, homeless, in jail, or in a mental institution. That's what happens to people who can't learn how to pretend to be a doulos or a banausos. But I came up with a 5th criterion, which is you can be a parasite. You can live off of somebody else who pays all your bills and supports you, but then you're not living an aristic life anyway, right? You're a dependent. So,
yeah. I wanted to say that, like you, I've never contemplated suicide, but I accredit that to my paranoia. I think everybody else is out to get me, and I don't want to become one of them. Okay.
Okay, that's a beautiful thing. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I was just going to say my observation of people who are suicidal, depressed, whatever, is that they look at the world in way too rigid a manner, that they're too highly impressed by externals. And it can be a bit illusionary. If you think, for example, if you have an inferiority complex, just think of the 2 guys who are contending for the most powerful position in the world at the moment. And that'll cure you of inferiority complex, because human beings are all pretty much the same lumps of meat. Allowed free reign, and we will succumb to the lesser side of our character, no matter how providential our lives were when we were born. That you're destined for a downfall unless you keep a grip on yourself. No matter, how much, if you were born to the best family, if there's no discipline or anything like that, everyone is self-seeking. I remember Les was telling me, he's got his altruism theory, and he said that people will sacrifice their lives for the good of for the community, proves their basic altruistic nature. And I thought, well, did that apply to Harris and Klebold? They sacrificed their lives for a cause in the Columbine massacre. That seems apparently were happy to shoot themselves at the end of it. But was that altruism? Well, maybe it was. I don't know. It's becoming, obvious that, we are born a little bit like a blank sheet. A little bit, not absolutely. Even Hume said we're not absolutely blank sheets. But when we're young, everything looks very impressive because you just soak it in and you don't question it. But you start questioning things in the world, and you suddenly realize that they're not the giants you think they are. All those other human beings you think that are doing better than you, yeah, maybe they are some of the time, but they can easily succumb to the lesser side of their nature. They can, have the good family, win all the awards, arrive at the peak of modern culture in a sense, and the cliff edge is still waiting for them, because we are just this meat. I look at cats and dogs. How different am I from a cat or a dog? I look at their nervous behavior, their desire for their desires, their feelings of pleasure and pain are almost the same as my own. As a human, I'm supposedly possessed by possessed of some sort of intellect, which a cat and dog doesn't have. But I would say we can be possessed by our intellect, because I don't know who is master, man or intellect. We keep on, there's this huge assumption, especially the rationalists, who assume that once we know the rules of thought, we are master of thought. Whereas Hume would say, reason is the slave of the passions. And yeah, I look at what man is. Look, a collection of apes hanging around the trees. They came down, they were apes on the ground, and the human form evolved. And really, if humans are these apes with a little edge of divinity, but they're mainly ape, don't suffer from an excessive inferiority complex, because it's not real. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, the thing about possessing ideas or being possessed by them, there's a Kenneth Smith. Kenneth Smith loves to quote, Donald, tell me if you can remember the name of the person who said it, but he says, it's Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Says the vast majority of people, the wise only possess ideas. The vast majority of people are possessed by them, says Taylor Coleridge. And that's part of the insight you're talking about there. It's like people assume that their ideas are their property and they're like a hammer and they can put it on a shelf and it goes away. And we really don't like the idea that the idea is busy at night burrowing its way and making connections of its own and reorienting our brain to make it compatible with those ideas so that we start to see the world. The man with the hammer starts to see nails everywhere. The ideas change us, they alter us. And with regard to suicide, another quote that Kenneth Smith likes to do is of W.H. Auden, who wrote a poem for a friend of his who committed suicide. And the quote, which I think is at the beginning of possibly, I don't know if it's Millennia, Microcosm, or somewhere else. It's at the front of one of Kenneth's books. It says, "We are lived by powers we pretend to understand." We think that we're in the driver's seat, but that's mostly an assumption. There's an extent to which, we can act genuinely with will, but it's a very complicated relationship with acting out of the impulses of our character, in which our will is being guided by our sort of.
Going to upset a lot of rationalists with this sort of stuff,
I mean, exactly, right? It's a critique of rationalism. Yeah. So Sharon, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Listening to Stephen, that's pretty sad. I just don't think that I am a mess. I think I'm a human. And like Aristotle says, what makes us different from rocks is the soul. But I wanted to pick up on something that you just said. You said there are no Aristoi in the world. And as we go through this section here, which is called character and class, and we keep talking about character mainly, and to live the good life is eudaimonia. That's what you said a couple of weeks ago, right? And it's got three components: the arete, development of practical wisdom, phronesis, right? And is that what you said? Is that the word, I think? And the third thing is moral strength. And what I read, that is defined as knowing the right thing and having the courage and the conviction to do it. And so I see a lot of that around me. And I agree with you. We have no Aristoi. I see this guy who's a Christian, big on pornography, yet he rushes down to defend a guy who is on trial for having sex with a porn star. Where's the moral strength there? Across the street from him is another guy from the other party, and he got away one time for stealing and taking bribes, yet he goes out and does it again. That's a character deficit, Menendez. So I agree with you. There is no Aristoi, because none of the people in our society who we think are Aristoi, starting with the Supreme Court, our leaders, our presidents, are demonstrating any of that moral strength. And that, I think, is the weakness. Number one and number two, I think we try to get to. But number three is a very, very, very big failing. And I want your comment on that. And it's because of this lack of moral strength, which I think is probably the most important component of the eudaimonia, that we are where we are.
Thank you, Sharon. This is partially about living in the late stage of an epoch. So, if we were in the early stage of an epoch, it would be demanding all the resources of culture that were available in the population to try to throw off the old order and to develop a new society. It's a creative act. If you're called upon to write a constitution, and it's the first constitution in the modern world that someone's going to sit down and try to design a government, it demands resources of character, and it draws you out of yourself. But after 200 years, 200 plus years, 250 years. Oh my God, how old am I? 250 years of running under that constitution, enough power has accumulated under the existing system that people don't want the boat to be rocked. Even if the boat is headed for disaster, they would much rather that disaster happen, because they figure it'll happen later. It won't be their problem, it'll be somebody else's problem. But this quarter, I need the boat to keep going where it's going, because if it changes directions, I lose great masses of power and money. And that would be terrible. What could be worse than me losing social position? Especially if ideologically I've managed to equate my status with success for the country, right? What's good for me is good for the country. What's bad for me is bad for the country. So don't you interfere with my business, or I have to stop you. This is the late stage response to proto-Aristoi. Somebody starts to come up through the school system and they question the teachers and they question the principal, and they start to rock the boat, then they get a bad grade. And if they get a job and they start to rock the boat, they get a bad performance rating and they don't get the promotion and somebody else does. And through these thousands and thousands of moments like this over the course of somebody's life, they find that they are absolutely excluded from the halls of power. And since they're not in the halls of power, they can't cultivate the culture and try to draw it into a healthy direction. So it's a defense mechanism in which, once there is an enormous amount of power and wealth invested in the status quo starts repelling Aristoi to keep them out of a position where they could disrupt that power. Sharon, go ahead. I see you're thinking.
But isn't this how, and I want you to correct me on this, how civilizations actually die? If they're not physically taken over, they die from the inside because of the moral depravity of the people. The relative moral depravity and acceptance of that lack of moral strength of the people.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is the ancient worldview in a nutshell, right? This is what we're trying to capture in this chapter, is how did the ancients see things? And this is how they saw things. You can, even the Romans, as barbaric as they were by comparison with the Greeks in a lot of ways, they too recognize the importance of developing people who have enough virtue to be able to stand against obstacles, who are willing to take a punch if it means that you can make things better for the world. But and So they decried the late stage imperial subjects of the Roman Empire for their passivity, and they're just going along with things. And they said they had this idealized admiration for the old republic and its sort of virtuous farmer soldiers. This was we're not going to spend a lot of time on Rome in this book, but these same complaints were being written by authors in the imperial period, saying what has happened to our moral fiber. We're running out of people who are willing to take a hit to do the right thing for Rome, and as a result, Rome is senescing into a stage of yes men and kind of rule by thugs that's causing its own decline. Go ahead, Sharon. I can see you're still thinking something.
So I have one last question. Not everybody in the Greek culture, where it was an aristoi or had aristoi behavior, what did the non-aristoi look like in the Greek civilization? And were they even recognized in that society? Or were the only ones who were given recognition were the ones who had achieved self-mastery? That
Yes.
I don't know.
So this is where that book I mentioned a month or two ago about the Greek attitudes towards slaves is really relevant, right? Because they're talking about douloi and associated people who can't vote. And this new book that I cited earlier, I say new, but early 20th century book by Cornford about the Peloponnesian War and its roots in the rise of the Banausoi. This is giving us some insight into the Banausoi, who were also not aristoi, and what their concerns were. And when you put them together, you can really see why. I mean, you sort of, rather than dealing in abstractions, you can deal in the concrete reality of what would it be like to be a craftsman living in the Piraeus of Athens, and you're a marble worker, you're a sculptor, and you aren't living a life of wealth. You're sort of living a tenuous life in which, as long as they keep working on the Parthenon, you'll keep getting the revenue from the Delian League, paying for you to be able to buy your daily bread so that you can keep carving statues. And if somebody says, why don't we just stop? Why don't we just stop taking all that money from the rest of Greece and let them keep their money? What you hear is, why don't you just die? How about you just starve to death? How does that sound? And so, of course, your response is, well, why the hell would I want to do that? No. And if we have to fight militarily in order to protect the flow of money, then that's what we have to do. You're thinking pragmatically. You know, that this is the Banausic life of a craftsman who's dependent upon the flow of revenue. And his concerns are very different from the concerns of somebody who's asking, where is this all going? And is this sustainable? And if it's not sustainable, how are we going to change it? You know, these are different levels of thinking. And of course, the doulos is thinking at an even more fundamental level, which is I have to do what I'm told. If I don't do what I'm told, I get in trouble. I don't want to be in trouble. So I'm oversimplifying, but this is how we answer this thing: as we look for these additional sources that'll tell us something. In general, it's easier to find what the Greeks think about douloi than it is to find what they think about Banausoi. And part of the reason is that the rise of the Banausoi in classical Athens blindsided Athenian civilization. They kind of didn't see it coming. Most of their writing about classes and differences in character are focused on, are you a prisoner of your passions and experiences, your parochial life, or can you free yourself from that to rise to a higher level? There's a lot less written in ancient Greece about the dangers of ideology and logic and what happens to your brain if you get out of your passions, but then lose yourself in theories and laws and so forth. Because they didn't understand it until Athens was falling apart. And then they said, oh, we appear to have erred here in overemphasizing the dangers of experience and underemphasizing the dangers of, you know, money, laws, and other systemic things. So that's part of why I'm excited about this Cornford book, because it's one of the few places where somebody is actually mining the available resources to say, what was the perspective of the Banausoi? How did they see the world? And what was their effect on Greek society? Kenneth Smith said for a long time that this is the case, but when I press him, he doesn't cite a lot of sources. He says it's the sort of thing you gradually pick up when you read lots and lots and lots of sources about the Greeks, you start to see the pattern emerge. But if you just dip into any one source, you don't see it, because even the Greeks themselves didn't quite understand what was happening to them.
So the society was not homogenous,
No,
because that's
not
the
at all.
impression you kind of get.
Right, right. Yeah, the different classes were living radically different lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, and more so in places like Sparta than in places like Athens.
Mhm.
The story about the Persian king coming to Athens and being angry because he couldn't tell the slaves from the free people. They're all just going about their business, looking the same, dressing the same. It's sort of, that was the pride that Pericles and other Athenians took in how egalitarian they were even towards their slaves by comparison. Whereas in Sparta, from time to time, the upper class would go murder a bunch of slaves just to prove that they're in charge. You didn't have to do anything wrong. You just, you die so that the upper class terrorizes the great mass of slaves. That's a wildly different form of slavery than what they had in Athens. But I think Donald also pointed out, Athens had the silver mines to the north. They're talked about in Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War, and the life of a silver mining slave was pretty miserable. He didn't feel like an equal. Xerxes would have had no trouble telling those people's lives apart from, the lives of the Pericles or somebody like that in Athens. So, we don't want to idealize any of this too much. But there's still differences of degree. It basically wasn't a single institution. It was a lot of different institutions all over Greece. Each polis kind of running its own political science experiment about how to make it work.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll come back to this. We'll come back to this because as we get into the medieval section, the revolutionary nature of medievalism was developed in opposition to Rome. And that's probably when we're going to talk about Rome, is when we talk about, Augustine and others and how they felt about the experience of living in the Roman Empire. Why they felt it was time to move on from the ancient world and into the city of God, into a world ruled by God. Phil, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, what's on my mind is I want to thank Donald for pointing out a very, very important thing, which is the concept of otherness. It immediately drew me to be thinking about the myth of Narcissus. Because when Narcissus looked into the water, he saw a reflection of himself. And in some ways, that could be kind of a contemplation. He's contemplating himself, the surface appearances of itself. That gaze of contemplation is a reflection on oneself in that sense. But it's important for human beings that the gaze of the other, otherness, is the thing that informs us. If he was able to look deeper into the reflection, he might have been able to see the otherness within himself. And so therefore have a deeper reflection rather than a contemplation about what it is being is. I don't know the myth well enough, but I think that it involved Echo.
Yes.
I think Echo was in love with him.
Yes.
But I don't think he paid much attention to Echo because, in some ways, it's very much like Narcissus. It's a reflection bouncing off the mountains or something. But as Echo bounces the thing, everybody could hear it. I mean, that is the sound of otherness. You could say a kind of musical gaze of otherness. And I think if he had understood that, he might have understood the reflection of himself as containing the otherness. And the problem we have with society now, this comes back to this, is that we don't understand otherness well enough. This need for otherness, and we have degenerated into, as Heidegger would say, being thrown into a culture. But what's essential being thrown into a culture is the structure of care. If you're thrown into a structure which is careless, we care less and less, then no wonder we do not feel comfortable. We feel alienated, As parents, like, instead of raising their children, just give them a TV set and cartoons, give them a computer, and they're going to be alienated from that actual gaze of the other, actual relationship. And I think that's what creates a dissonance we have in society now, to a certain degree, that distance ourselves from the closeness of being with others. And I think this is both a technological problem as well as the business of culture, that in a sense that separates us from the other. In fact, we think about the other people, like they got nothing to do with us, In fact, the other is in fact an important part of the structure of care. And I think we have distanced ourselves because we don't even care about schools. We don't care about anything in a funny way. So, yeah. And I think all this came about from what Donald said, and my recontemplation or reflection of Narcissus. The ability to see the otherness within yourself will give
Yes.
you much more empathy and relationship to others,
Yes.
because it's a double reflection of the gaze between you and the other. That's it, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Donald.
Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I was just thinking of something Sharon said, that, she was talking about the goods. And I was looking at Kierkegaard's principle there, where he talked about the aesthetic individual, and then the ethical individual, and finally the religious. And it just made so much sense. I spent most of my life being the aesthetic individual. Oh, it looks very nice. The world looks like a nice place. Looks like there's a lot of sensible people running it. I won't strive too hard. I'll just find myself a nice little warm spot on this beautiful Titanic, which people built for other than me, but I can take advantage of it and meditate on my belly button and have a good time. That's the aesthetic individual. And then, of course, he talked about the ethical individual. And for many people, ethics is the highest order. And this is a thing I constantly have with Les, is he talks about this, the moral. And I have to keep on reminding him that moral doesn't just mean good. It also means evil. If a person is knowingly evil and devotes their whole life to evil, they are a moral person. If a person's only interest is how much food they're going to get, or how much women they're going to get, or whatever, well, that's the aesthetic individual. But a moral person can do bad things. And this is a danger. And of course, Kierkegaard, well, look at the Nazis, look at the Marxists. They're doing good. Nazis, we know Jews are the great evil in the world. If we eliminate the Jews, there'll only be goodness left, won't there? The Marxists, once we've shot all the bourgeoisie, there can only be goodness. Now, that's trouble with being a moral fanatic. or an ethical fanatic, you might have the wrong idea. And this is going to the next level, the religious. I mean, I was looking at, to terrorize Donald a little bit, I'll mention Jordan Peterson again, because he's pointing out, you had these German policemen. They're sent to Poland. And their job was, to do all the round up the people and shoot them. And they found it personally distasteful. But after all, they were doing it for a good cause, the preservation of the German state. They were being moral. They were being ethical doing all that. And this is why Kierkegaard says that you also need to rise to the next level, which he called the religious, where you question authority, you question ideas. You don't just get a 10-page summary of what is good. And I will do all that to the last T without thinking about anything, because, well, Kierkegaard's pointing out the problem there between the aesthetic individual and the ethical is that the ethical individual is a person who accepts responsibility for society or his society. And most people would prefer to be lazy. It requires effort to be ethical. And it requires an even greater effort to be religious, which Kierkegaard means probably being a philosopher, that you really need to deeply question all the values you have. You have to deal with the antithesis. This is painful. I find philosophy painful. It undermines my inner certainties. But most of the people in the world just love their inner certainties. And they don't want to have their hair mussed up in that regard. So this is a danger when we talk about good and ethics. Do we really have the right idea? Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, earlier in the chat, you posted that set of sentences from section H, which we'll be getting to in a few weeks. But let me just recapitulate the opening sentence of what you put there. But such a moral regimen was only of value where indeed true Aristoi sought to constrain themselves by means of piety and reason. And that reference to piety is critically important. We'll come back to it again, but it's what you're talking about the difference between the merely ethical and the religious. That if you rely 100% on reason to solve all your problems, you leave yourself vulnerable to bad premises. Like if you have the premise that the Jews are corrupt, all people of impure blood are corrupt in Germany, and Germany can't be healthy until its blood is pure, and therefore we have to eliminate everybody else. That's maybe completely reasonable, but it's false. Reason, the validity of logic and the truth of the world are orthogonal to each other, whereas the rationalist believes they're aligned with each other and that what is valid is true. And that's what Hannah Arendt critiques, totalitarianism as its fatal flaw, that it has no check upon its reason. In fact, it is proud of the fact that it's willing to ruthlessly pursue the logic, because that then they believe that they're being pure in their logic. They're not allowing their logic to be contaminated by, mere feelings such as, dear God, I'm committing genocide. It's like, no, we put that aside, right? And we just embrace the logic of what we're doing and admire ourselves for our ruthlessness. And next thing you know, we've committed atrocities. But with piety, when it's done correctly, not hypocritically, and it's hard for a modern to imagine piety that isn't hypocritical, thanks to the way that the medieval epoch ended, and also the televangelists have contributed. But genuine piety has to do with being plugged into the fundamental archai, that you don't want to let your reason dislodge easily. So you want to use them not as things to be deduced from reason, but as frames that check your reason and stop it if it's leading you towards, for example, self-extermination or genocide or any of the other non-phronesis outcomes. So that idea that the adult form of the human mind is armed, equally with experience, with reason, and of course the other thing, with piety, this religious element that you're alluding to that Kierkegaard talks about. Kierkegaard totally gets this, right? This is his upgrade from Hegel, and again, it's an attempt to capture this Greek idea and merge it with what Kierkegaard saw as the better parts of the medieval. But in doing so, it's not a betrayal of the ancient, because the ancients themselves believed in mythos. They believed in the importance of having checks on reason. This was their critique of the Banausoi. They just go too far. They forget why they're doing things. And so they miss the mark. So we'll come back to this issue. It's going to be especially important as we inflect out of chapter 4, the ancient world, and into chapter 5, into the medieval world. Is this issue of the role of piety and religion in the adult mind is going to be critically important. But it's understandable. It's, why would a modern intellectual have trouble accepting the idea that, the adult mind is a religious mind that includes more than just reason? This is heresy from the modern perspective. The modern perspective is we overthrew all of that because that was the cause of 1,000 years of terrible things, and now we're liberated from the old hypocrisies, and we're free to do the reasonable thing, and surely only goodness shall follow. Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
So just to very quickly understand what you just said, you're saying piety. To be pious, you most likely have a relationship with the transcendent, with the religion. Is that what that's saying? They're equated there? Yes? No?
Sort of. Piety recognizes the idea that there are sacred things that are not to be the playthings of reason or experience, and that they're more important than what feels good to us or what's ideologically self-consistent. That those things, those sacred things, need to act as a frame to check our appetites and to check our ideologies. And so you can call it religion, and it's tricky because in the modern world there's so much hypocrisy in religion that you do that and immediately you get all these atheists jumping up going, what about hypocrisy? It's like, yeah, there's been a lot of hypocrisy, but that doesn't change the truth that you can't find your way to the most healthy ways of living if you limit yourselves to your experience and appetites on the one hand, or on the other hand, if you limit yourself to your ideological logical conclusions. Both of them will lead us astray from what's good for humanity without that extra third check.
So my real question was to respond to Phil on otherness, about otherness. So the characteristic that I listed previously for eudaimonia, the arete, the development of practical wisdom, and the moral strength, those are internal characteristics, the way I understand it. But Aristotle talks about external characteristics. And if I read the rest of this section right, Kenneth Smith talks about it. And one of the things is, after you have room, board, and shelter, you have to have a connectedness, friends, people that hold you accountable. And I think that's what we're missing in today's society. And it becomes easy for the power structures that run our society to divide us. Because, you divide and conquer, right? United we stand. And that's right where we are. In fact, I was in my clinic the other day, and I forgive me if I've told you this already, and I was taking a history for this woman, and she told me she had 15 children, 15. And I looked at her and said, really? She was from Zambia. I said, well, how did you manage? She says, oh, doc, the community. That was it. And child number 12 was standing by her, fully grown with her own children. But she wouldn't have 15 children in America because the community would not. I mean, the neighbor down the street had 12, but it was all their responsibility and commitment to each other. And that's what I think we're missing today, because what we have left out of that connection is failure to recognize our basic humanity. That, My blood is just as red as yours, right? And we do pain and joy and sorrow all the same way. Different circumstances created, but it's an emotion that we all experience. So I don't know if I'm getting your concept of otherness right. But when I was reading this of Aristotle, and I saw he had the internal factors and then the external factors. And friendship was one of the big external factors. Thank you.
Hey, Sharon, just a quick word on otherness. You know, when you're thrown into a structure of care, you could take criticism because underneath the criticism, you know it's coming from care rather than just hostility. And so, therefore, in a sense, you need to have that structure to accept input. Otherwise, you can reject it. So, care is a very important factor. It's
Care,
actually it's not just internal feeling, but there's a structure in society.
yeah, that's what I was saying. That's what I
Yes.
was saying.
Yeah.
That there's the connectedness that we have to each other.
Right.
And another thing about criticism, even if it's negative, it's still useful. It all depends on your reception of it. And I don't receive it as negative. Well, how can we make it better? Positive criticism, as I tell the young people in my life, you don't grow from the mountaintop, you grow from the valley. And so when you're in the valley, you look around ways to climb the mountain. So if it's negative, tell me how I can make this better. So I have a different perspective of it, just a whole different life view.
Thanks, Sharon and Phil. Zoe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, Phil's a mention of Heidegger's care, and when I was able to kind of unlock Heidegger and understood that he was looking at Dasein as a discourse first being, right? We think in terms of talking to someone. We talk to ourselves, we hear ourselves, we're discourse oriented. And what really made me understand the modern times in relationship to the ancient ways was that we as individuals are thrown into a context like a word is thrown into a context. And in at least in college, what I was taught is when you write paragraphs, when you include words and when you have terms, you're supposed to relate them to one another, right? Even the essay, when you think about what Montesquieu, I think it was Montaigne who created the essay, he said that there's a loosely connection of the essay of the prose. It's not just haphazardly these unrelated notions. Like there's at least some slight connection when you're writing an essay from one idea to another, right? When you talk about the galaxies and then you want to talk about mathematics, when you know how to write an essay properly, you find the connection between the galaxies and mathematics and to your everyday life. And I think Heidegger understood that when Dasein is thrown into a context of care, it's like when you're writing an essay, you look to make a connection between one word and another, from one paragraph to another, from one page to another. And what we're missing in modernity is the problem is that Jacques Derrida, when he came along and he wanted to expand on Heidegger's deconstruction, was to show that there is no connection in nature, that nature doesn't have this overarching theme or book, if we would call them the book, but the nature's book. There is no nature's book according to deconstruction. And so we no longer see ourselves as interconnected individuals, but basically aphorisms that have no connection whatsoever to anything, and we are the supreme truth. And so I really like Gadamer's take, where he tried to use Heidegger's understanding of what Dasein is, right? Dasein is a discourse creature, and the whole purpose of Dasein is to meet these chasms, these horizons that we encounter every day with people. We can't connect with people every day, but we should strive to see how am I related to somebody that is completely foreign to me? How can I see my connection to someone that doesn't look like me, has a different lifestyle than me, doesn't have the same moral system, moral values than me. Where's the connection there, right? And at least in the ancient Jewish perspective, it was the imago Dei, the image of God, that connected people that could possibly not even look like you, not even in the same place as you, but you found yourself connected because you were created in the image of God. And in modernity, we're basically like unconnected. There is no connection. We're just floating words around with no fundamental connection because we don't believe there's an overarching context where we have our meaning from. And I think that's where modernity and Heidegger, in my opinion, is key because he understood that we're basically like words on a book, and the context gives us our value. And if you are in a context that no one cares, you're gonna make no sense to yourself, to the people reading you, and you're gonna enter into despair, right? And then that's where Heidegger talks about, the philosophy of emotions as well, and how you can enter into some pretty dark situations. And I think that's what we're missing. We're missing the ability to see that we're a part of a larger context. We no longer believe that as moderns. There is no larger context. There is no book of nature. There is no book of God. We're all playing a role. We're just alone in this world. As Nietzsche said, floating in the vast of nothingness. We don't even know what's up and down. And I think that's what in modern man is at. He's floating in space in nothing.
Thank you, Zelig. Yeah, I mean that's the critique against modernism that Kenneth Smith's going to get into in the late chapters in the book, is this idea that through the stages of development that led from the ancient worldview through the medieval worldview to the modern worldview, there was a purging. The medievals purged nature as a source of authority, and the moderns purged God, and that just left people. But people aren't a reliable source of authority on anything because people can be totally different from each other and want opposite things. We lack phronesis that comes so naturally to animals. And so there's no there. If you're trying to make humanity be an authority, you can't, you're standing on quicksand. It's not actually solid ground. It feels like, in an abstract way, it feels like it should be solid ground. I mean, right? Nature, God, man. Man is one of the three things, and so therefore it should be just as good as the other two. But in fact, the nature of man, the ethos of humanity, is so different from the ethos of the rest of nature or the ethos of the sacred that what we find is that there's a great sucking sound of nihilism ultimately when we try to construct a civilization on no basis other than what do people want. So the answer is, well, some people want to destroy everything. And evidently they get a say. Their desire to destroy everything is just as good as the desire of someone to nurture people. Why not? Right? A vote is a vote. We just count them up, and whatever the answer comes out to, that's the answer. And what we've done is we've substituted an algorithm for counting votes to make a decision in the place of what used to be a quest for what's healthy and good. And we've done it without ever actually asking ourselves the question, is this a good substitution for us? Does it lead to good things? So, right there with you, Zelig, on this. I mean, this is the stuff that Kenneth Smith's talking about in this book. And it's part of why it wouldn't take long for someone like Aristotle dropped into the modern world to look around and say, not, wow, these people must be gods because they walk on the moon and they save people from heart attacks and they fly in planes. I mean, sure, he'd see that stuff, but right away he'd see, man, these people don't stand for anything at all. I mean, like they have no virtues. All they have is vices that they have redefined as virtues. And their idea of government is, let's just follow an algorithm and see what comes out the other side. Garbage in, garbage out totally applies to the way we structure our civilization. But we hold it to be sacred. You can't seriously question the law or the Constitution, or you end up in jail, right? I mean, that's what happens to people who say, wow, this is wrong. I don't like this outcome. It's too bad. That was the vote. This is what we're going to do. So there's a in the place where either God or virtues and health used to be, depending on which epoch you're talking, now there's nothing at all. Just a How shall we count the votes? Which votes shall we count? What's our method? There we have an answer. You know, I spent some time working on I wanted to write a book about horror movies. So when I was a kid, horror movies were a great solace to me. Not the hack and slash type stuff. I grew up on the classic Universal monsters, you know, Dracula and Frankenstein, Wolfman, and all that stuff. And I wanted to write a book for beginners who were interested in that stuff. How would you get into it? This was 30 years ago. And so I set out to try to identify how do I distinguish the good films from the bad films? Because I mean, the first time you sit down to watch, you know, Plan 9 from Outer Space, or you know, it doesn't take long to figure out not all of the horror films are good films. Some of them are just absolute trash. I mean, just you can enjoy them, and I certainly like my share of trash films, but they're trash. They're not at all at the same level as certain other horror films. And so I got into that whole question of how do you discriminate among these things? And I went through a period where I tried it the modern way. Of course I did. I was raised in modernity. So I said, well, why don't I find all of the great film critics and I'll just collect all their scores and I'll put them, I'll use math to get them all on the same scale. And then I'll add up the numbers, and whoever's got the biggest number, that must be the winner, right? That must be the bestest of best films. I went through over 40 algorithms trying to come up with a way to turn other people's rankings into a universal ranking of horror films. This is, without my realizing it, I was going through the same thing people do when they try to come up with voting systems that will lead to good government. How do you add the numbers up in such a way that what you get out the other end is goodness? And it turns out it can't be done. It's impossible. Can't be done. Something comes out the other end, but it's not goodness. It's like the numbers hide all the important parts, right? Everything about how you discriminate and what is a story about and what are characters about, all the real qualitative stuff can't be reduced to numbers. And any attempt to do so ensures that the list you end up with in the end isn't about what you thought it was about. You might get a list of films that made a lot of money, so they must be good, right? Or films that are popular, so they must be good, because as we know, nothing is ever popular and bad. That just never happens, right? Or, you know, if you get to some of the film critics who are trying not to fall for those traps, they'll do like, here's a variant. What are directors who have won Academy Awards who early in their career did a horror film? Right? It must be Steven Spielberg did a horror film called Duel. That must be the greatest horror film of all, right? Because Steven Spielberg's won a lot of awards. Not for Duel, mind you. That was an early thing that he did. But for, you know, Schindler's List and things like that. Surely his goodness rubs off on everything he ever does, and that elevates Duel somehow to a masterpiece because it's got Steven Spielberg's name on it. There are plenty of horror film critics who that's exactly how they do their horror film criticism. But it doesn't take long to figure out Duel is just, I mean, it's okay. It's not bad. It's gripping, but it's just not a profound film. It's not, there are many better films, you know, than Duel. And the same is true if you run through all of the great, you know, Academy Award winners who have at some point made a horror film. You know, a tiny, vanishingly small number of them are actually good in their own right. So by the time you finish going through all these algorithms and all these different standards that do everything except directly address the quality of the film, you realize there's no algorithm to get you from here to there. And that's when I began to understand the flaws in democracy. It's like, it's not that I want fascism or anything, or any other totalitarian system. It's that it's a mistake to confuse what we have for perfection. You have to be able to see the real problems. And many of these are the problems that the ancients identified early on. Yeah, Duel is a masterpiece. Matheson is the great sage. Thank you, Stephen. That's right. There's nothing that could be improved in it whatsoever. And then I went through a period where I believed that must be true because the algorithm said so before I went, you know, my algorithm sucks. Phil, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I'm almost tempted to address the issue you just brought up, but I'm not going to, maybe some other time. I want to go back to the structure of care, because one of the best examples I saw the structure of care, I've told this story before, maybe even to this group, is Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. There was a scene in Taxi Driver. You know, Travis was a very troubled man. He had many, many troubles. And I think the last trouble that threw him off the edge was he was infatuated with this lovely woman, and was couldn't get anywhere near her and whatever. So he just ready to explode. He couldn't make sense of anything. So he went back to the taxi central and to talk to the wise taxi driver, the wise taxi man, the philosopher taxi. And he began to just blather off all sorts of things. And the guy is, of course, a very kind and friendly guy. He tried to talk about this in generality, talk about that. He's just all over the place because he couldn't figure out what the trouble was, you know. And finally, after talking for a while, Travis says, and excuse my language, Travis says, "You don't know what the fuck you're talking about." But thanks for the talk, which is interesting. In other words, the structure of care goes beneath the logic or anything that you could penetrate. It's a structure that sustains it. And in a sense, that taught me a lesson that, like, when a friend is in trouble, you often say, "Oh, I can't figure it out. I can't tell you what to say." That's not the way to say it, because what's important is you project the fact that you care about the person, and you could say almost anything, It's like it will make sense on this other level of letting the steam, the pressure off, in a sense. So in other words, you always have something to say as long as you care about somebody, So don't think that you have to solve the equation because that's the wrong way to approach it. That is one way of approaching it, but when you don't know what you're talking about, anything, because it carries the tonality and the structure and the relationship that, in a sense, will alleviate the pressure and give some sense that there's somebody in the world that cares about me, and that's an important statement in itself. So that was a very, very interesting scene. It's a very troubling movie, but that was a very, very important scene. That's it, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. So let's see if we can wrap up paragraph 11 today.
Yes.
I saw Sharon came off mute and I knew what she was thinking. So
this quick interjection, because I think it's important. Phil, I don't know if you care about somebody. It's the saying, like the doing. The doing is much more impactful. In my 72 years, I can tell you that. The doing is saying is a minor part of it. The doing is the impactful part. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the good, as the Romans understood, is the enemy of the best, indeed the mortal patricidal enemy. And that sets up the next sentence. He's not just putting a truism. The next sentence is, what is ultimately idiotist in human beings, and of course by idiotist, we're referring to the things we've been talking about before, the issues of deformed character, where someone decides to live their life either as a symptom of their feelings and experiences or as a symptom of their ideologies and systems. And of course, idiota means one's own. It's not that you're stupid. You can be the smartest person in the world. But if your primary preoccupation is your own things, that makes you an idiot, right? That is the problem with the human condition, that we live in a small place in a small time. We only see a tiny perspective on reality, and that tiny perspective can't remotely come close to the full complexity of the cosmos that we're in. Not even the full complexity of the village we live in, or anything that we're into. We're still only seeing a slice of it, and we see that slice because to be an idiot is essential in the human condition. But so, what is ultimately idiotist in human beings demands the same right of autonomy that Aristoi wield, the right to pursue freely what seems important to oneself. And this is the danger, right? That when it comes to phronesis, sophrosune, these issues of self-providence, how can a human being be persuaded to notice and care about and pursue the things that are healthy instead of all of the many other things that draw us away from what's healthy? How can that happen? And the problem is that even though phronesis, according to Heraclitus, is the highest of the virtues, it's the most essential of the virtues alongside wisdom. It's, you know, we can't be wise without phronesis because we don't know how to judge between things if we don't know where health lies. And it is the paramount concern. And yet, our idiotist appetites and experiences don't want to submit to phronesis as a master. This is the problem we have as a species. The cheetah can only submit to its phronesis because it's got that instinctual matrix. But we lack the instinctual matrix, and instead we have something in us in which our appetites on the one hand and our ideologies on the other demand to be taken at least as seriously as genuine phronesis. In fact, they don't want phronesis to be part of the conversation. They, you know, our ego, our will, if we become a mathematician of the typical modernist variety, we want math to be everything. We say math is the secret language of the universe. Everything is mathematics. Nothing else is real. Only numbers are real. Everything can be calculated. And we do that because we demand that our ideology be God, that it be all things in all times in all places. And there's no room, that leaves no room for phronesis. Where is the pursuit of health? When do you get up from behind your table where you're jotting your notes to yourself, trying to prove that what everybody else around you does is a mathematical equation? Where do you put that down, get up, and go garden? Grow a tomato or something, man. I mean, get some exercise, do something healthy. Take care of your neighbor who needs your help because his house is on fire. You know, I can't remember which philosopher it was. Was it Donald might remember? I don't know. Was it Descartes? Somebody who there's a war going on in France, and instead of helping out, he climbs into his oven or into some space where he's isolated from the bombs and explosions and continues working on his philosophical manuscript because nothing could be more important than my brilliant thoughts about the universe. Like no emergency, not even the end of the civilization around me, could be as important as my obsession. My obsession is everything. If I'm collecting Pokemon cards, that's the most important thing in the world. Everybody else should just shut up and get out of my way. There's no room with these kind of manias that we're subject to. There's no room left for phronesis. There's a crowding out effect that happens. And so when he's talking about demands the same right of autonomy that Aristotle wield, it means that, if we are a Pokemon collector of this particular manic variety, not just a normal Pokemon collector, but the manic form, then it means that we don't want to talk about anything else. We don't want to spend our time doing anything else. We don't want to exert ourselves doing anything else, only this. And this is like we were saying, you're never going to see a cheetah try to collect all the gazelle. This kind of level of obsession that displaces phronesis is impossible. A tree can't do this. And it's not just because it doesn't have a nervous system. It's because it's not sick. we're the animal that has the problem. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you, but again, this sentence, what is ultimately idiotist through to the end, is one of the best things Kenneth has written. Earlier, a few weeks ago, we were discussing the idiotic or whatever. I'm not up to forming the right Greek forms today. Didn't get my B3, Stephen. But it was like it was easy to see what made a douloi idiotic. And it was fairly easy to see what made a bonosus idiotic. But then there was being idiotic didn't seem to apply to the heuristic. But Kenneth here has said, I think, has kind of cleared that up in a way that all douloi, bonosoi, aristoi, this right to pursue freely what seems important to oneself. We all have that. It'll apply to all three of our character classes. So the big difference is not that some have this drive or demand this freedom or right. It's what seems important to them. It's the what, not that some have this right or don't have this right, or some have this passion or don't have this passion. All men have this passion. They want to do what they want. What's important to them? It's that some select the object of their passion is not just themselves. It goes beyond that. So that's they can see the community, the polis, taken to one. I keep wanting to. I was thinking about this earlier when I read this sentence, that maybe we have a bonoisoi who, instead of just worrying about his business, is an economist. He's still only worried about numbers, but he's taken a big view, of how economics works and business principles or something. So he's still not an aristos because he's focused on this instrumental reason. And maybe there's a dualic, I don't know what, somebody studies labor economy or something like that, and the importance of I don't know. I'm just making this stuff up in a sense. I'm trying to be serious and funny at the same time, but that one could sort of overcome oneself as a slave, and that is you're like a labor economist, or you're concerned. You wrote a book on the history of slavery in North America or among Europe. I don't know. You wouldn't necessarily be an aristos because you weren't taking a broad view of society and how to balance everything in it. But you might not be just driven, by your those immediate personal needs of maybe family or something like that. Well, anyway, this I think kind of helps, and it helped me a lot to see how, because I knew being idiotic was not a characteristic of just douloi or bonosoi or whatever, could apply to anybody. It was some other force. But this seems to make it me clearer how this can apply to aristos. They have the same passion. They demand this right, pursue freely what seems important to themselves. But what seems important to themselves is not those immediate personal concerns. They're greater. Okay, enough. I'll go back to sleep, Stephen.
No, it's great. What you said is right on the money. This is the issue, and this is the problem. So let me share fragment 2 of Heraclitus, which I was reviewing this morning. There it is in the Greek, transliteration of the Greek, and in the English, and I'm putting them together so that you can see. Let me read it. We should let ourselves be guided by what is common to all. Yet, although the logos, by which he means, the laws of nature, the underlying intelligence of the cosmos, is common to all, which means by his first sentence that that's what we should be guided by. Most men live as if each of them had a private intelligence of his own. Now, if you go up to the transliteration, the last two lines of the transliteration end in Zoosin hoi polloi hos idian ekontes phronesin. Phronesin, remember phronesis, right? There's phronesis. And hoi polloi, that's the great mass of men. Hos idian, that's idiot right there. Right? But you don't see idiot in the translation because it means one's own, his own, of his own, hos idian. The Greek conception is not, haha, I called you a poo-poo head. The Greek conception is the problem of being obsessed with your own things. That's the problem. You could be as smart as you want, but if you're obsessed with your own things, it makes you an idiot. It makes all of us an idiot. We all struggle with this. And that you put this together with what Donald was just talking about, and you see that what Kenneth's saying here is that the ancients saw the challenge being you can't let 6 lions and a zebra vote on what to have for lunch. It's not okay. It's not okay. You have to evaluate the what. What is it? Not just that you want it. That doesn't give you equal standing. But what is it that you want? And if you want to wreck everything, you shouldn't get a vote. We'll bring you back when you're healthier. You can vote on other things where you're not crazy. But on this issue, you're crazy. You're voting for destruction. And that's not acceptable. And there's no way to average the numbers. There's no way to make the algorithm work such that it resolves that problem. And so what he's saying is what is ultimately idiotist in human beings, not just other people, not just I'm an Aristos and my opinion matters. Other people are idiots and they're bad and they shouldn't get the vote that I get. In human beings also, as Donald was saying, means in me. The things in me that are idiotist want to have their say, and they feel like they should have an equal say with the parts of me that are actually trying to do some damn good in the world, right? So my desire to eat a hamburger, if I just watched a show in which chefs were making, competing to make the most delicious hamburgers, and I've had it, an hour of watching that, and I've had it, and I need that hamburger, right? That feels overwhelming to me in that moment. I might put down my preparatory notes for today's seminar, which are more important in the long run because we're trying to talk about how to overcome these problems. And I might not even have been hungry before I watched the show, but now that the idiotist thing in me is awake, it demands equal standing. And so this becomes a problem if we say, but Jesus Christ, most people are letting themselves be ruled by the idiotist parts of their natures. That's the majority. The majority vote is for some form of slow or fast self-destruction and not phronesis. And that's the fundamental problem that Section G is talking about. I think Donald's right. All of Section G comes down ultimately to this one sentence. This is the fundamental problem of character and class, according to the ancient Greeks. Donald, I saw you came off mute. Go ahead. Yeah,
you just reminded me of that famous philosopher in Guardians of the Galaxy, Rocket Raccoon, when he says at the end, but what if I want it more?
Right.
I mean, that's a theory of economics and property that rivals Marx, Hegel, Adam Smith.
Yes.
But what if I want it more?
Right. And that moment is both funny, really funny, not funny at all.
No.
Many of our problems in a nutshell are right there in that little exchange. Yes, that's the don't steal anything anymore. And Rocket's response is, but what if I want it? He's like, nope, that would still be illegal. But what if I want it more, sir? Surely that matters, right? The idiotist part of me demands the same autonomy. And of course, autonomy, the other thing to watch for in this is the Diogenes quote, the proper conduct of life demands right reason or a leash. So are we leashing the idiotist parts in ourselves, or are we turning them loose to do whatever they want? It's like a dog you haven't trained not to bite people, and you think, well, I shouldn't have to leash that. That's the authentic part of me. And the response is, well, the authentic part of you, needs some basic training how to be a mensch and not to run around biting people's ankles. So, yeah. All right. Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, apologies, I'm late. And it sounds like, I mean, a really good discussion as always, but something that you said actually that was very meaningful to me was something where you mentioned that we behave as a symptom of our experiences. And then, how that relates to our own personal idiocy. There's a couple things that have actually come to mind with that. One is that ultimately, then your experiences dictate your interactions with others. So, in other words, it's so if your experiences are not necessarily positive, then you're going to carry that into every other relationship that you're entering into. But if it's wisdom to know yourself, then I can tell you that it definitely is idiocy and actually hell to be turned in on yourself. And meaning when you're only thinking about the world from your perspective and your problems. And so that you start to have this, like in a way, you're actually limiting yourself because to your experiences actually creates its own bias. And so I have been turned in on myself at certain points in my life. And what happens is you don't notice the other people around you. And so that gets back to what is pursuing what is good, right? What is good are the relationships that we have with each other. So, kind of when we just think about the world from our perspective and not necessarily a broader perspective, then it becomes a living hell. And so, one of the things that often I helps a lot of people to deal with difficult circumstances is to realize that they're not the only one that has gone through it. And so that, that you realize, okay, well, I have two ways of looking at this pain that are this experience that I'm going through. Either I can turn in as acting as if this is happening to me and that and the world's horrible, or that you could start to say, well, look, there's somebody else that's had the similar experience, and how do you help out? I mean, so in other words, pursue what is good. So I can just say that again, I think the most important thing is that yeah, we understand what wisdom is, kind of knowing ourselves and by knowing ourselves, our experiences, we can separate our experiences and our behaviors in a way, we can behave in a way that's actually pursuing what is good despite our experiences because we know ourselves. But to be turned in on yourself, that's really bad.
Yeah.
A really dark place.
Yeah.
So, and you don't notice anybody around you, and it's just like this spiral. Anyway, so I think that that's an important part of this when we're talking about pursuing what is good.
Yeah.
And what it really means to be an idiot. And in the sense that it's not just in the sense that, obviously we're not talking about just the intellect. We're talking about something much deeper. And yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. I'm with you, Joe. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a lack of perspective. That's really what it is to be an idiot. Our perspective is way too limited. And the worst thing for an idiot is to be closed in on itself and get even less perspective on the world and just be trapped in itself. But of course, that's the way that Dulea and Banausea operate within Homo sapiens. They become traps that close in on themselves and sort of define away all alternative perspectives. And they make you think that this is the only real perspective. This is the only true, authentic perspective. And so they're entrapping. The Daedalus getting out of the labyrinth myth is so critical to the quest to become an Aristos. The recognition that being trapped in ourselves is the worst fate. I mean, Sartre can say hell is other people, but the ancients would say, actually, you don't need any other people around to be in hell. You could do it to yourself. We are self-enclosing and self-entrapping unless we learn the value of the struggle to get out of the labyrinth. Otherwise, we just extend the labyrinth further and further.
Just really quickly, I mean, this is where there's an element of wisdom and understanding what we control to that point, by understanding that, then we don't necessarily look at the world, kind of as this is the circumstances that we're in, and by understanding there are a lot of things outside my power that you can have kind of a way of looking at the world that's separates your experience from your your behavior. And so that's kind of, you also need to know yourself within that framework. But yeah, that really actually meant a lot to me when you said that, us being a symptom of our experiences, because that is really dangerous on so many different levels. And it's the basis for a lot of ugliness.
Thanks, Joe.
To ourselves.
Yeah. Thanks. Good to have you on the call. I always enjoy these.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. I was busy, and I'm glad I got this in.
Yeah.
I missed a lot too.
Fortunately, Dave records these things and puts them up on YouTube, so it's possible to go back and pick up the pieces we missed. Phil, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I just wonder whether this is not a deeper problem than we could manage, in a sense. And it might have started from living beings in general, because living being want to be, and being seems to be a very important thing about living, because living things seem to have a subconscious understanding of it being transitory. And human beings particularly not only understands this, have this in a subconscious level, but understands this. And so we have engendered this thing about being is doing, and action and doing is being. So it seems to be a very part of our nature, so much so that we structured it within our language. It goes back to what I said earlier about, it's hard to even think about making no footprints on the earth and just let it be, because you are part of that being, and you deserve, or maybe I shouldn't say deserve, none of us deserve it. You insist on being there. And so I wonder whether we could ever escape that, because I said if we might be able to minimize that if we structure a language in which, like, in a sense, the otherness of whole being is already there. And we are kind of an intruder. I think living beings in general, but particularly human beings, notice how we have intruded upon the earth. And I don't know, maybe the cosmos, we're beginning to intrude in the cosmos. And so, some people have claimed that we're the virus of the universe. So I wonder whether that is not even beyond something that we could control. I suppose if you really, really are, how should I say, a moral being to the utmost, you should go kill yourself right now. Notice how you're disturbing everything that was they're before you, you know, like I'm not going to do that, at least voluntarily, you know, that's going to happen soon enough. So, yeah, I guess the most you could do is to understand that there are other beings in the world, I suppose, including rocks. You know, you normally don't think of it, you know, and minerals and so forth. And you try to make it less impactful as you can while you are sustaining your being, I suppose. You know, otherwise, like, it's kind of like saying you are a virus, the world has no place for you. You should get the hell out of here. I don't think that's what we're trying to say at all, but nonetheless, there seems to be a deep parallax between that and human beings, human being. So, yeah, I just thought I'd bring up that when you get all the way down, there's a problem. You know, somewhere in the mid level, there's not a problem. When you get all the way down to, like I said, it's a very, very ambiguity itself, you know, because what gives you the right to be versus a gazelle or anything else, you know? So, yeah, I just thought I'd raise that because, you know, I don't think even philosophy could solve that problem because I imagine even philosopher wants to be. So that's it, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. So, like, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
It makes me think that, you know, being an idiot sometimes it's a very attractive. I think about being in love with your first high school sweetheart. There's nothing like that. Like every letter this person writes, the way this person writes, the way they look at you, the way everything has a meaning when you're just, you know, in this love stupor, you know, and the world seems to be a better place, even though there could be a war going on. When you're in love, at these very like your first love, in my opinion, marks you forever, and you're always chasing that. As one of my Spanish professor said, you know, you're always chasing the first love that you had in your life, and it's so true. Like I can remember the type of being under the spell of, if you can call it that, of being in love. It's just it's a different it's a different experience. This is what Heidegger talks about, being in the world in such a different way that makes life, everything is amazing. Everything is amazing. The world can be burning down, but you're in love in the world, and nothing can take that away from you. And I think being an idiot, it's a great feeling if you can get yourself tapped into that kind of high school teenage love. But keep me in this world. I want to live another day. But the problem is that when reality kicks in, and you're just, you know, it's not real, then, and it's very hard to look at the world and say, look around you. There's wars, there's famines, there's people dying. The job you're getting at is going to be automated. And what are you going to do when you're 50 and you no longer can do your discipline because it's been automated? Please take me back to the high school teenage love, you know, but you've discovered, you've known the truth. You discovered the truth. And so, yeah, being an idiot, you know, I think about high school teenage love as being that, and some people find it in other expressions. And it is a very good feeling because the world is a better place under that spell.
Thank you, Zelig. Yeah, anybody who doubts what Zelig says about this, just go to YouTube and Google baby goats running and jumping. We'll watch some YouTube videos of baby goats just bouncing around, totally excited, out of their minds with joy. It's that is sheer happiness, and it reminds you of the times in your life when you felt electric and alive. You know, that I think part of the attraction of idiocy for us at an emotional, deep level is that just for a moment we feel a little bit like other animals and plants do. That ability to feel like your natural impulses are leading you in a healthy direction. It feels like a more authentic way of life than the way of life in which you question everything about yourself and what you're doing. That the latter might lead us more towards the adult mind and a healthier life in the long run, but it feels artificial and disconnected because it is, right? It's a negation of a negation, according to Hegel. It's not that there isn't joy to be found in it, but what is the price of clueless joy? There's a price to be paid. As good as it is, as lovely as it is, and as much as we need to retain our ability to connect to joy in life, we also have to recognize that, for however much of a unalloyed virtue it might be for a baby goat or a kitten, it's not as unalloyed a virtue for Homo sapiens. So we're lacking some safety rails and training wheels and safety guards to go with our joy, alas. So we'll do our last set of questions, Donald, Joe, and Sharon. So Donald, go ahead.
I just wanted to congratulate Zelig on actually having dates in high school. Must have been really interesting.
Did you not?
No.
Okay, well, on that note, Joe, tell us what's on your mind.
You're not alone, Don. It's but in that category. No, but what Zolly has brought up is actually an important point. Is like what is good is somewhat simple, and principles in many ways are simple. It's just that when life gets complex, it's that how to adapt to that complexity. But it is by relying on principles and having a framework to actually understand the world, not necessarily just letting our experiences dictate or, the way we feel or the systems that we live in as well. So I think that that's a really important point is, what is good is not that hard, but then humans actually have a tendency to make it a lot more difficult than it needs to be. And so, anyway, I thought that was an excellent point.
Thank you, Joe. Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
It's called overthinking it, Joe. I just want to end with this. Being in love is a trick designed by nature to ensure propagation of the species. Because if you ever had any idea what it was all about, you wouldn't do it. So you have to enter some kind of euphoric stage to get to it. That's my take on being in love when you're very young. It's all very good feeling, and that's all it is.
Yeah, but another way to read that doesn't disagree with what you said at all, but sort of turns it on its head, is that it's important to the species that Homo sapiens.
That's right.
And this is therefore, even though for an individual it might be, difficult, you got to spend the next how many years raising these kids, but for the species, it's great. And so this is one of the places where our instincts are actually aligned with what's long-term healthy for our species. And we always say, well, that's because it's sex and sex is, love are fun. But another way to read it is that's what it's like when your instincts and your health are aligned. That's what life feels like. So, I watch the way cats run around when they're doing stuff that has nothing to do with sex. And I could see that same level of joy of, to the feeling of confidence and belonging and energizing that comes when your instincts and what you want to do are exactly aligned. It's like, yes, this is it. This is the thing. That's why I shared the baby goat stampede video. And you gotta watch them tearing around like idiots just because they're so happy. I
don't know if you know about Bruno Mars,
Yes.
Rick, but the songs he sings, it's like your love is like walking into heaven. And that's exactly what it is, It's when you're perfectly aligned and it's like it's a euphoric experience.
Euphoria.
It would be amazing if we can always live there, you know?
Yeah.
Zelig, I love Bruno Mars.
There you go. There you go.
I mean, there's nothing to me when I was young like being in love because
Yeah.
it was such a euphoric experience.
Yeah.
But as you get older and wiser, and when you're very young, if you ever had the capacity to appreciate what your actions might involve, you just would do it.
Right. Right.
But you're not aware of it. So it's a trick designed by nature to make sure the species gets propagated.
Works great, right?
Yes.
Now, if only self-introspection and learning to develop the adult human mind felt that easily, naturally good, right? That would be different. Human beings would have a different kind of life. But alas.
Yes.
So I just,
it's
I'm
great.
gonna get the final word. Come on, tell us what's on your mind, Phil.
Yeah, I think I have a much more sublimated and complex romanticism within me. I think I'm trying to learn how to be in love in the ruins. You know, I think that's the proper manifestation of love, to be able to sustain oneself in the ruins of existence. That's it, Phil.
You gotta come back, Phil. You gotta die and then come back.
Phil, you need to listen to some Bruno Mars, Phil.
Yes.
I prefer the ruins.
No, you're gonna die and come back, Phil, because it's a phase and it's absolutely delicious.
Yes. So there's a link to a Mark Ronson and Bruno Mars song, Uptown Funk, which has got to be one of the funkiest songs from the last 20 years. It is just, you watch the video, it's not just the rhythms and the music, but the video, the people in it are so connected with their own life. Everything is going exactly the way they want it to. And that, even just to watch it is addictive. You know, it's like watching a James Bond movie where he's got his stuff together and he knows what to say, and you know, we're all like, man, I wish I knew what to say. I do not know what to say or do.
No, I think I have some support, because even the Buddha said, samsara is nirvana.
Yeah. So on that note, I guess that wraps us up for today. We have got through paragraph 11. Hey, look at us.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we'll pick up with paragraph 12 next week. And it's one of the, we're coming in towards the end of section G. And then we'll wrap up with H, and we'll be ready to start the medieval world, maybe sometime in July. We'll see.
Oh,
yeah. Thanks, everybody.
It's Christmas in July. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.